change it up a little bit. Thursdays every now and then is just have an open Q&A. I have, as always, shaped this around questions I've got from my patrons. I think what we will try and do is start talking about House of the Dragon, then talk about Rings of Power, but we can move around in between them as well. And just a few things to say before we get into it. A little bit of an update from George R.R. Martin. He's been doing a small bit of a media tour over the last few days, and he seems to have adopted a line to take against the inevitable questions about where he's at in the Winds of Winter. And that line is he is about 75% of the way through as it stands. Now, there's a wonderful clip. He was on the Stephen Colbert show a couple of days ago. I retweeted it, where you can see Colbert's a massive nerd, and you can see when he heard this, you can see his brain immediately whirring to go, okay, so if it took him 11 years to get 75% of the way through, I've given up trying to guess exactly when this is going to happen. I think 25% of the way through is good news. He is most of the way there. He is apparently, he's going back and rewriting a few earlier chapters that don't quite work for him. This is his style. This is what he does. So there's nothing to panic about that. He has finished a couple of major character arcs, he says, and he's sort of put them to one side. They are done now, but obviously he still has a little bit more to go. So don't expect it this year. It's not going to be here for Christmas. I think we can probably safely assume it's not going to be here next year either, if he's still got another quarter of this to go. It's already big. It's already about the size of the two largest books already in the series. So this is going to be a massive book. We knew that already. The biggest book, I think, A Dance with Dragons was something like 1,500 pages. So expect this to be more than that, maybe 2,000 pages. Who knows? So it's not going to be published in one volume. That much I can now almost guarantee, I think. What that means, I don't know. Maybe they will publish it in 2, 3 different volumes, maybe all at the same time, maybe one after another. Those are discussions that they will have later on once he has got a completed manuscript. But 75% of the way there, and not too far left to go. So that's good news, I think. Secondly, and the other thing to say is he's in, and thank you, Andrew Kay, for reminding me of this in the chat. He is at an event today with Neil Gaiman in New York, which leaves me very jealous. I'm a huge fan of both of them. But we have got spies in there. So Aziz, who I'm sure you know, is there, as are a few other people who have got Song of Ice and Fire podcasts and other content creators, and some other people who are subscribers here. So we will get the readout from that. Do not worry if he says anything new. I suspect he probably won't say much new. I think that this 75% line is the one that he's sticking to for the time being. But if we do get anything new, then I will be sure to let you know. Spoiler policy on these live streams. As always, I'm trying to say these up front now. Book spoilers are absolutely fine. Show spoilers are not absolutely fine. We're at the end of the season now, but what that means is that we might be talking about things which might happen in later seasons of both shows. So if that's not for you, then this might not be the live stream for you. And the last thing to say just before we get into it is I've hit a personal milestone with this channel just, I don't know, 3-4 days ago, maybe even less. We hit 500,000 subscribers. And if you will permit me just a few moments just to say a few thank yous, because this is not just me. There are so many people who support this. Patrons, I say it every week, I mean it. We would not be where we are right now without your support. Thank you so much. Moderators, I want to say a special thank you to you. As it's a live stream, you create such a wonderful space here, making the chat such a safe space for everyone. That's what I want this to be, and also an uplifting space. Something can be that where we can not just talk about books and TV shows that we love, but also actually try and make a positive contribution in the world as well. Talking of which, I should probably say I've been doing charity live streams all the way through both of these TV shows. I switched that off for one because I just wanted to do a special Q&A here, and I find it easier with the if it's not a charity live stream to keep a track of what's going on in the chat. But that will be back. We will finish that one off on Sunday. I'm going to do one more House of the Dragon live stream on Sunday, and we're very close to hitting $7,000. So thank you hugely for that. But today, super chats are back on. Normal rules have resumed. But in terms of thanks, if you have ever supported this channel in any way, if you've watched videos, if you've shared, if you've liked, if you've been a patron, if you've become a channel member, if you've done anything like that, thank you. This is amazing to be amongst so many wonderful people. So thank you. It means a huge amount. But that said, let's get into the Q&A for this time. We had, actually, I think I had a, what was it? I had a super sticker. Thank you very much from Danex Hoax saying, keep it up. Thank you very much. I certainly intend to. Let's start with a question from Diego Godoy saying, hola, Robert. Hola. Following last week's interesting discussion of Targaryen dreamers like Helena, Daeron the Drunkard, Daenerys the Dreamer, Aerys II, and perhaps even Aegon V, what do you think defines who will be a dreamer and who will not? Do all of them have the capacity to be dreamers and just need to unlock it somehow? What sort of events do you think can trigger these dreams? Well, this is a fascinating subject that we're really getting into here on House of the Dragon that we didn't pretty much at all in Game of Thrones. The dragon dreams are there through A Song of Ice and Fire. Dany gets dragon dreams, and we hear about in the history. Obviously, there's Daenerys the Dreamer, the person who prophesied about the need to leave Valyria, and then we have Daeron the Drunkard, who's there in the Dunk and Egg stories. John the Fiddler, of course, who is Daemon Blackfyre the Second. We get lots. And what George R. R. Martin has said is that now these are all tied together. This is not just like random people who've got random dreams. This is all linked together. So that, I think, is one of the key building blocks we've got. Another key building block that we've got is something that Viserys said, which is that they are rarer than dragon riders. So what that means is that not every Targaryen can get this. This is a gift. This is something that some get, and not everyone seems to get it to the same level. Viserys did get one dragon dream that we know of that he misinterpreted, it would appear. The one, you remember the one about and I saw my son on the Iron Throne and the thunder of horses and all the dragons roared as one. That was a dragon dream. He just misinterpreted it, but that was it. He's never had that again. Whereas Helena, I've got a video coming out hopefully tomorrow on Helena, which the more you look at what happened in the show with Helena, the more you realize almost everything she says and does could be interpreted as prophetic. It's as if she's living in a completely different world. She sees things in a completely different way. It's just that nobody ever takes her seriously. Nobody ever seems to understand that she is saying these things, which I think is a bit of a tragedy in the waiting, because what we have is that she will see things, and particularly as we get closer and closer to the Dance of the Dragons and as it unfolds, more and more tragedies will be what she sees. And if people keep on ignoring her, if she sees stuff, if she sees things about the fates of her children, of her family, and people keep ignoring her, that is going to get increasingly tragic. So that's another thing, is that it varies according to who the person is. And thirdly, I think, as a kind of a building block that we have here now, is that, as George Martin said, they're all kind of linked. They are very much focused on dragons. It's not, yes, you can sort of see the future and things like that, but it's not just about random stuff that happens. This is big and violent things that affect Targaryens and they affect dragons. And later on, they become about hatching dragons again. That's what so many people seem to be having these dragon dreams about. Starting with Daemon II Blackfire, he seems to be having visions about dragons hatching. Dany has visions about dragons hatching. It moves on. She later has visions about, or a vision about riding a dragon and it's spewing fire over ice creatures, which you can guess what people interpret that as meaning. So what we seem to have is this thread which matches up to the prophecy from Aegon, this Song of Ice and Fire that we've had. So the dragon dreamers are not just random people who get random dreams about random things. They're here in support of that dream. And if the Targaryens took them seriously, this seems to be how they go about ensuring that this actually works. So if they listen to Helena, they would understand the Dance of the Dragons is about to happen. They would understand Aegon just, or Aemond needs to be careful when claiming Vhagar, that kind of thing. If they actually start listening, they have got a chance to prevent the bad stuff from going on. So that's what my take is on all of these dragon dreams. And this is not just random stuff. This is very clearly all linked together, and George R. R. Martin wants us to see them as all linked together. Let's get to a few questions from the chat. And thank you, by the way, lots of people saying congratulations on 500k. Thank you. I do really appreciate that. I can't read out all of them. Archit's saying, I got to know Joe Magician, History of Westeros, Radio Westeros, 3 amazing creators via you. So thank you very much. Well, I that's one of the things I wanted to do during the season, is to introduce people to other content creators, because I'm not just like I don't have a monopoly of wisdom and knowledge on either of these shows. There are so many fantastic content creators. And if I can push you out to show you some of these other amazing creators, then I think that's I've done a service to the fandom there. So I'm so glad I would agree all 3 of them are excellent. So I'm glad you got a chance to be introduced to them. Elijah Taylor, can you touch on the new characters that will be introduced in House of the Dragon Season 2, like Daeron Targaryen and Cregan Stark? Yeah. So there will be a few. So Jace will be going on his trip north. Exactly how much of that they show, not 100% sure. He should go to the Eyrie. He then should go to White Harbour and then to Winterfell. Probably they will just focus in on Winterfell. The Lord of Winterfell at the moment is this guy called Cregan Stark, who is a great character, and he will have a very important role right at the very end of the Dance of the Dragons. And he is sort of this archetypal Stark, if you just imagine what Stark should be like, but he should be quite young. So it's not like Jace is going to go up there and meet this sort of elderly Stark person. This is somebody who is very much in kind of the mold of the sort of the younger Ned Stark kind of feel. That's what we're looking at. So he's going to be an amazing character. Daeron Targaryen is the youngest of Alicent's children. He got sent off, to be a ward down in Old Town. Now, they didn't mention him or talk about him or show him at all in season 1, but they did sort of say in kind of a few of the behind the scenes things, yeah, we know he's there, don't worry, he will make an appearance. So we will meet him probably in season 2. So he's going to be quite important, because as you can imagine, when we get to war, you have to muster the armies. And where are the armies for Team Green? Well, obviously they've got King's Landing, but they've also got the 2 big allies are the Hightowers and the Lannisters. So expect armies to be coming from the west. So he will be there, and he's got a dragon to Sauron as well. So he is very young, but he has got a dragon, and unlike the majority of where these dragons are to start with, they're all off in King's Landing, Driftmark, Dragonstone. He's right off in the west of Westeros, so he will be there, and he is Diran the Daring. He's quite a brave young boy, it has to be said, and keep an eye on him. Who else might we see? We could well see, and this is one of the characters I'm really looking forward to, Alice Rivers, who is magical and mysterious, and she is based in Harrenhal. I think I'll probably do a video on her at some point because she's just so well written in Fire and Blood that it makes you just go, well, hang on a moment, is she a bastard from the Strong family, which would add an entire new layer to this? Is she magical? It looks like she was from Fire and Blood, but we'll have to wait and see what they do on the show with that. We got told that she was quite old but looked young, that she was spared when Daemon was there and took Harrenhal, but then becomes Aemon's lover. And then, as I say, book spoilers are absolutely fine on this, but here we go. But then, at the end of it all, she suddenly turns up and says, hey, I've got a Targaryen child. I'm pregnant, and I'm going to have a Targaryen child. And it's like, okay, so what's the future here? This is one of the huge hanging threads at the end of Fire and Blood Part 1, and we do not know what's going on there. The other characters we might have, quickly rattling through them, we should have the dragon seeds. I think that's the other thing to probably mention. This was teed up when Daemon goes to visit Vermithor the dragon in the last episode we had of House of the Dragon. He goes there singing that beautiful song, and he seems to be warming up Vermithor to the idea that Vermithor is going to have a new rider. And this comes from the Targaryen bastards that they can round up from Dragonstone, Driftmark, elsewhere, and they just try and match up dragons and people who've got some kind of Valyrian ancestry to them. So we will be meeting people. Nettles, I'm fascinated to meet. She'll be excellent. We get two intriguing characters, Adam and Alyn of Hull, who are allegedly bastards of Corlys Velaryon. Maybe they're not. Maybe allegedly they're Laenor's bastards. That seems less likely, but there's something going on there that I'm sure the showrunner will wish to work through. And then we also get a couple of other fascinating, Ulf White and I always forget a name on live streams, but another Hugh Hammer, who take the other two dragons, and they will also play quite a pivotal role. So look out for them, because this changes the balance of war. If you suddenly get 5 new dragon riders on Team Black, that is massive. Vermithor, you kind of saw it a little bit in that snapshot from episode 10. Vermithor is, after Vhagar, the biggest dragon there is by a long way. So that's why Daemon was so keen to get Vermithor on side. Matthew Yardley saying, no questions, just to say thanks to you and the moderators. Love the channel and the fan. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Question from Roman Lakovets saying, thanks again for your wonderful content. I just wanted to ask you again, do you write detailed scripts for your videos or just general notes? Scripts for live streams, obviously I don't, but for my normal videos, yes, I write out a full script. That's one of the Patreon benefits, incidentally. So when I release a video, then the audio goes there. There's an RSS feed for patrons at, I think, $5 level, and anyone who's a $2 patron gets access to the scripts that I do. So yeah, I do a full script for every main video that I do. Simondal saying, I became a patron today. Welcome. Following your channel for over a year. You deserve it. What do you think? Thank you very much. What do you think about the show's twist on Luke's death being an accident? It definitely caught me by surprise. Yes, so this was, I'll have to take a sip of water for this. I have thoughts. So I liked this. At first, I wasn't sure, because one of the things that, and I should say, House of the Dragon I loved. I have very few concerns or critiques at all about it, so this wasn't a big thing. But one of the few small things that I had a bit of a concern about was that they, in the effort to try and make characters and motivations a lot grayer, which I approved of, they quite often injected in this element of misunderstanding or confusion or accident, rather than intentionality in what sparked the war. Now, that's fine. I just, as I say, I prefer our protagonists to be more intentional rather than just everything's a bit of an accident. But the more I reflect on what happened there, the more I actually like it within the context of the show as a whole. Because one of the things that felt discordant when it was said was Viserys. I can't remember exactly when it was. It was halfway through the season, something like that. And he says that the dragons, the Valyrians should never have tried to harness the power of dragons because we can't control them. And this felt really, as I say, discordant, because Targaryens never say things like that. Targaryens love dragons. So why was it that Viserys suddenly, the king, was just being all kind of, yeah, I'm not so sure about dragons, can't really control them? That felt a bit weird. But then suddenly we see that pay off in the last episode of the season, because we see actually neither of the two people riding those dragons could control their dragon. First of all, this was Luke not being able to control Arax. Arax, understandably, was wanting to tell Vhagar to back off, because Vhagar kept on swooping and swooshing around and snapping and things like that. But Luke couldn't control it. And then obviously Aemond couldn't control Vhagar. So that had a payoff. But also it makes you start to think about the fact that this is a thread that George R. R. Martin has been starting to weave through the Targaryen narrative. That dragons aren't controllable. In A Song of Ice and Fire, Dance with Dragons, Dany, when she finally does ride Drogon, she can't control him. She's just flying off into the Dothraki Sea, and she has nothing she can do to control Drogon. And she's had a bond since Drogon was born. So she is the mother of dragons, and yet Drogon completely ignores her. She has not got control, and her mind is going, well, how did the Valyrians do this? How did they in the old days? And she thinks, well, I think they might have had some magic horn that might be able to do this. I think they had some chains and maybe whips or something. And she's trying to figure out, how do you control a dragon? And that will have a payoff, I'm sure, in A Song of Ice and Fire. As we know, we've got Dragonbinder that Euron has given to Victarion, so that will have some sort of payoff there. But also, if you remember, going back, Viserys, why is Viserys himself thinking about how you can't control dragons? Well, Viserys didn't ride a dragon from any time while he was king. The only dragon that Viserys bonded with and ever rode was Balerion the Black Dread, and he only rode him for a very short period of time. And Balerion, we know, if Vhagar's sort of old and grumpy and sometimes can't be controlled, Balerion was even worse. There's that fantastic, if you've read Fire and Blood, you know where I'm going to go with this, with Balerion and Princess Aeria. And she climbs on top of Balerion, and Balerion just flies off somewhere. We think to old Valyria, and comes back, and it's just, there's tragedy and quite a little bit of horror going on there. That is the dragon that Viserys had. And yes, maybe he might have been able to control Balerion a little bit, but I do wonder whether there was something that made him go, you know what, I can't control this dragon, not completely. This is hundreds of years old. This is huge and powerful, and I cannot personally control this dragon, which would have led him to A, not try and bond with another dragon, which is what happened, and B, to have that view that perhaps the Valyrians should not have messed around with trying to bond with dragons. So this is the what I'm saying is that scene at the end of episode 10, I actually now really like. I thought it looked amazing just to start with, and I think it gave us an extra twist on Aemond, which I also particularly liked. But I think in a kind of a meta level, what I really love is this is creating, or the next link in this kind of chain of understanding about the lack of Targaryen control over dragons. They're not in control of their dragons. Let's have a flick through. I got a few more questions. Yep, Cloaked One saying, pardon me, saying 500 flipping K. Thank you very much indeed. I can't think of anyone more deserving of additional attention to your channel and achieving this monumental milestone than yourself. Congratulations, and here's to 500K more. Well, thank you very much. And Cloaked One, as one of my moderators, thank you. I hugely appreciate all that you do. And I'll do it early this week. If you are there in the chat and enjoying the chat, please do say a little a thank you to the moderators. They do a fantastic job there. Question from For My Peoples saying, did Viserys' dream not predict the dance? His son with the conqueror's crown takes the throne, leading to the thundering of hooves and clashing of shields and the dragons roaring at once as they dance. I think it did. I think he misinterpreted what happened. And enough of what was going on there was leading us to think that maybe it could have been that. He certainly thought it was the thunder of hooves, the splintering of shields. But yes, I think that was a proper dragon dream. I think it was the prediction was about the Dance of the Dragons, and he interpreted this as a good and positive thing, but actually this was not. So yeah, I think you're spot on. I mean, I don't think I've got huge amounts to add to that other than to note that with Helena's dreams as well, they can be multi-layered. This is not necessarily just a one thing or another. There might be echoes of something happening in one place and then a real kind of fulfillment of the prophecy at a later moment. For example, there's a beast under the boards is probably to do with Rhaenys and Meleys underneath the dragon pit, coming up and breaking through, but also probably also refers forward to blood and cheese. And it could refer to both things. Prophecy does not, particularly in George R. R. Martin's world, prophecy is not just like kind of a Harry Potter prophecy where things have to happen exactly what it is and there's only one possible thing. Although, having said that, Harry Potter, they did have it could apply to two different people. But it's not a hard and fast thing. Prophecy will happen like this. The moment you start to believe it and trust in it, that's the moment that you... it kicks you in the teeth. So yes, I would agree with you. Andrew Kay saying, I think that Deeren is crucial to the show with the Greens, as he is one of the few honourable, sympathetic ones on that side. Yeah, he does come across well. I do wonder whether they're making Alicent or pushing Alicent, and Helena obviously comes across very well. And I think they're trying to make Aemond look more three-dimensional. My general take is that the two characters that they've got who are clearly baddies at the moment are Otto, who doesn't seem to have any redeeming features thus far, and Aegon. And Aegon is probably now past the point where we start to feel sympathy for him. Maybe they'll try and show us another side of him in season 2. I don't know. Philip, do you think they will move up the conclusion to the Lannister-Greyjoy conflict to happen alongside the end of the dance? Oh, this is interesting. So, yeah, the Greyjoys do get involved in the dance. So we do get the Ironborn involved, and both sides try to get them involved. Now, the Greens, Otto basically says, you can join my side, you can have a seat on the small council, I'll make you master of ships, here's a detailed offer of all the different things you can get. And the Blacks just go, well, we're not going to try and recruit you, but if you want to go and raid the Lannisters, that's up to you, and we're not going to try and stop you, which the Iron Throne would normally try and stop them from doing that. So that is what eventually happened. But then once the Red Kraken is the name of the guy who was the head Greyjoy at the time, effectively, and he became quite a character and just carried on even after the end of the war. So I think they can go one of two ways with this. They can either bring the whole Greyjoy, as you say, the whole Greyjoy plot in and trying to squash it in a little bit, or they could just have it all going on off camera. And I think, given the fact that they're going to try and fit this in, as far as I can tell, we haven't had full confirmation of this yet, but 3 more seasons, and they've got to fit a lot of storyline in those 3 seasons. It would not surprise me if they just have that being a bit like the sort of the toing and froing on the Stepstones. For most of the season, we hear about what's happening in the Stepstones, but we don't actually see it. Yes, we had one episode where we saw a couple of things happening there, but most of the time we just hear about what's happening. That might be how they go with this, I'm afraid. There's a lot of action in the different parts of the 7 Kingdoms. If they wanted to trim out one bit to keep it smaller, then that's the most obvious bit that they would do. Steve Owen saying, don't they have to change Rhaenyra's ending? It's too dark and fans are still upset over Dany's fate. Well, I hope they don't change any characters' endings. Personally, I mean, I'm okay with the way they've sort of changed some things, sort of off camera, so to speak. So with Laenor, for example, that worked for me absolutely fine because the book was not categorical about what happened there, and that leaves open the space for the showrunners to come up with a slightly different tweak that still fits within the grand narrative. Rhaenyra's fate is central to what happens with the show as a whole. I think the story requires both of or all of the main combatants to be out of action by the end, because otherwise how can the realm be at peace? Rhaenyra cannot survive this, otherwise there would still be war, because once we get into war, there's no stopping either side. So I think that her fate will have to remain the same. Whether they do it in exactly the same way, I think probably, yeah. I think they will. I think they're not going to shy away from dark in this. I think that we will see probably the beginning. I've said this before. Blood and Cheese, I'm pretty sure, will be episode 1 of season 2. They're going to kind of come straight in with shock and awe, and just take the audience and slap them around the face a bit and say, this is what you've been missing all this time. So I think they're going to do that with Rhaenyra, and I think it's a good death. And they kind of foreshadowed this a little bit with Laena, I think. So whether you're saying it's too dark, fans are still upset over Dany's fate, I don't know. I think that we will see that Rhaenyra, although at the moment everybody, certainly by this stage in the book, everybody was very much Team Black and on Rhaenyra's side, it becomes very apparent as the story goes on that she becomes less sympathetic. Certainly the small folk turn against her. And if they manage that well, then it will feel less abrupt than what happened with Dany on the show. So what happened? I mean, I'm not going to get sidetracked into season 8 of Game of Thrones, but one of the reasons why it felt so jarring with Daenerys was that it just felt very bang, there, we're done, and it just sort of flipped and she's gone. This, if they handle it well, is going to be a long build up to that moment from where we were of this the Realm's Delight, although I don't think they actually ever called her that on their show, to Maegor with teats, which is what the small folk called her in the end, because she was not good. I mean, it was pretty extenuating circumstances, to be fair to her, but she was not a good and healthy ruler of King's Landing while she was there. Captain Anopheles saying, do you think the Celtigars were hard done by on the show, not mentioned as surviving Valyrians? Yeah, I guess so. So for those who don't know, House Celtigar, one of 3 families of Valyrian heritage. We know obviously about the Targaryens, we know about the Velaryons, the third are the Celtigars. Now, the Celtigars are on Claw Island, which is just a little bit north of Dragonstone. It's smaller, it's less significant, and basically they just get ignored by pretty much everyone. Even if you go to, there's this great bit in Brienne's chapters when she's going up Cracklaw Point and she's talking to this guy called Nimble Dick Crab, great name, and he's just like bragging about the history of that part of the world, and basically it turns out that the people there, although technically they should be paying their sort of their dues to the Celtigars, they just don't, and they get away with it because the Celtigars, nobody really gives them any kind of attention, any kind of respect, and so that it kind of worked for me that around that table, yes, he was one of the lords, but he wasn't being given any special statuses because his family had some Valyrian heritage. So I was okay with that, I think. I mean, are they hard done by? Yes, they are hard done by, but I think I was okay with how it was represented. Ross Gould saying, hi, Robert, congratulations on 500k subs. Thank you very much. My question is, in the second age, so this is Lord of the Rings, why was it called the Last Alliance of Elves and Men? Why aren't dwarves mentioned? Well, I mean, I can try and pick up on that a little bit more in the second half when we're talking more about Rings of Power, but because it was mainly between elves and men. This was mainly a big alliance between the Gil-galad's elves and then the former Numenorians, Gondor and under Elendil, basically Gondor and Arnor. So that's what the alliance was. Others did join them. Yes, some dwarves joined them, but it was mostly an alliance between those two peoples. So that's why it was called that. And added to which, if you want the meta narrative on this, this is called that by the elves. The elves very rarely give credit to the dwarves, it has to be said. Marvin Martin, do you think they'll plant any seeds in House of the Dragon to factor into Jon's spin-off? You think the other 2 wild dragons will get bigger parts than in the book? Okay, so spin-offs is an interesting one because they have been planting seeds for potential spin-offs in House of the Dragon. You saw that the book that they were reading, they being Alicent and Rhaenyra, all the way back at the beginning of the show, that was they were reading the history of Nymeria, and that was where the torn page that she was given right at the end, that was a page from that book. If you remember when you get the that poor bard who was trying to sing a song, and Rhaenyra was saying, carry on singing, and Alicent was trying to say, stop. That was a song about Nymeria. So they have been trying to plant the seed of Nymeria as being an important part of the history of the Seven Kingdoms. Also, when you go into the Great Hall at Driftmark, you will find, if you looked around the outside, what looked like trophies from Corlys Velarion's 9 voyages, which again is kind of teeing up this idea of voyages. And they've mentioned the fact that he's a seafarer and has been on these voyages a few different times. So they are trying to tee up a few of these things. Might they tee up Jon? I mean, this is a couple of hundred years in the future when the Jon Snow spin-off would happen. I've not seen anything specific there. If they do, maybe it would be something when we get up to Winterfell, when Jace gets up to Winterfell and talks to the Starks. Maybe we'll see something there. There wasn't much I could see in season 1, to be honest. So the problem is that is completely new. And in order to as in a completely new script, and it's not based on anything George R. R. Martin has written. This is unique amongst the spin-offs we've got, in that this is in the future compared to Game of Thrones / Song of Ice and Fire. So you can't as easily tee it up because those people might not know what the overall plot is. The showrunners, when they were writing that, wouldn't know whether that was going to happen, what that plot was, or anything. In terms of the other 2 wild dragons getting bigger and better parts than in the book, I think that they are probably going to play it quite. I don't know safely with the dragons, but I think they're probably very aware of the fact that in trying to give the dragons different personalities, different histories, different looks, they're effectively introducing new characters, and they don't want to overwhelm us with lots of new characters. So I think that they will introduce some extra dragons, so they have to with the dragon seeds. But if we're going to have 5 dragons happening with the dragon seeds, then they might just not do much about other dragons hanging around. So cannibal, for example, they might mention, but I don't think they're going to make a big thing of cannibal. Paul Siegel saying, having learned about the significance of Bloodraven from your excellent channel, do you see any foreshadowing of Bloodraven or his agenda in House of the Dragon? Well, yes. Because I see foreshadowing of Bloodraven everywhere, this is the one thing that you can guarantee I have my tinfoil hat on for everything. So he comes from House Blackwood. So he was a bastard. Bloodraven. He appears. Oh, in fact, I should probably clarify for those who do not know who Bloodraven is. The Three-Eyed Crow, the Three-Eyed Raven. He's an amazing character. By the time we see him in Game of Thrones, then he's really old. He's plugged into the Weirwood network, but he's got a great history behind him. He's half Targaryen, half House Blackwood, which is really important. Blackwooder, their family with the First Men, although they're based in the Riverlands. We've seen a bit of House Blackwood already. If you remember when Rhaenyra was going out, having suitors coming, trying to persuade her that they should marry her, you got that young lad who was there saying his thing, and then he was getting teased by somebody else, and then they had a fight, and he won, and we weren't expecting him to win. That was House Blackwood. So against the Brackens. And House Blackwood are going to be very important here. We're going to see a Black Ali, who is a great character, who is a member of House Blackwood. And we will probably see her, and she will eventually marry Cregan Stark right at the very end of all of this. So she's going to be pivotal towards the end. But the Blackwoods, George R. Martin has confirmed again recently, are one of his favorite families. So there is there's a chance that we might see them even more than they appear in the book, because they're there. They're one of the biggest, most important families in the Riverlands. They appear quite a few different times in the wars that follows the Civil War. So will we see anything here? Well, I think so. I think that in terms of sort of the big meta-narrative, what we've got going on here is we've got Song of Ice and Fire, which has already been mentioned, obviously. What we have with Bloodraven is that he is a son of ice and fire in a way. He's got both the Targaryen bloodline in him and also the First Men bloodline in him from the Blackwoods. And that is where he gets his green seeing from that side. Now, if we're looking for, and this is Joe Magician has done a lot of work on this, I highly recommend you go and check out his channel. If we are looking for evidence of the weirwood network getting involved in what's going on here, or just keeping an eye on it, you just have to look at how many different scenes happen with that weirwood tree in King's Landing. It's there so many times when people are having secret conversations. The weirwood tree is right there. They are linking it across to Larys Strong, pardon me. They're linking it across to Larys Strong. There was one time when Alicent's there in the garden in the Godswood, and then we hear Larys's voice, but we can just see the weirwood tree. And another time when they're just standing facing each other, and in between them is the weirwood tree face. So they have gone quite a lot into this. Added to which, we've got a few other touchstone moments where we have Adam Velaryon apparently will land on the Isle of Faces. And also we've got what's going on over the God's Eye Lake when we get the final battle between Daemon and Aemond. Now, what I will do at some point when I want to have a huge tinfoil video is try and start making the link between the fact that we know that the weirwoods thrive on blood from blood sacrifices, and we know that that is how they soak up memories of people. That's how they soak up knowledge of what's going on. When you get, which we will have, 2 Targaryens and 2 dragons dying in the Godswood Lake by the Isle of Faces, there will be blood everywhere getting soaked up by the weirwood trees on the Isle of Faces. They will at that point start to get knowledge of this Song of Ice and Fire, if Daemon by this point learns about it, because it did appear in episode 10 that he didn't know about it at that point. Then perhaps that is the point at which the weirwood network start getting really interested in the Targaryens, really interested in that bit of prophecy and how this ties in with what they're wanting to do to defend against the others. So yeah, I think there's lots, none of this is set in stone, but there's lots of bits of, you say foreshadowing, maybe this is foreshadowing, but there are definitely bits of hints about where the weirwood network could be playing into all of this. Martin S. saying, why is House Hightower absent in the Game of Thrones show? They do seem very powerful, more so than the Lannisters in House of the Dragon. Are they still around at the time of Game of Thrones? Yes, they are. So they, but they're not as powerful, but they are still hugely powerful. So at the time of the Dance of the Dragons, basically the sort of the power dynamics are the Targaryens on top, and then you get 3 houses just under them. We get House Velaryon, who are powerful because of their navy. They're powerful because Corlys Velaryon has made them the richest house there, and also because they're links in with the Targaryens. Then there's the Baratheons, who also have links in with the Targaryens, and also they've been there. Storm's End is just 2 weeks' ride away from King's Landing, so they're close by, and they are generally always in and around court and powerful. And then the third house is House Hightower, who are, yes, rich, but also Old Town was the city before King's Landing grew up, which was quite recent. And they've got the Maesters, they're the chief supporters of the Maesters and the Faith of the Seven. So these 3 are the next, and then below that you get the other great houses like the Lannisters and the Starks and people like that. So that's the tier that we've got going on there. By the time we get to the time of A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, House Hightower are still big and powerful, but the Lannisters, with their Lannister gold, and particularly with Tywin Lannister, have managed to get themselves politically to a higher level than House Hightower. They've got the money, they've got the politics, and people are afraid of Tywin. So they've sort of leapfrogged everyone. The Hightowers are still there in Old Town, but they've largely kept to themselves. After the Dance of the Dragons, then they're kind of not meddling so much in the business of what goes on in the wider Seven Kingdoms. They're sort of staying as they are. And that does fit in with what happens in Song of Ice and Fire and in Game of Thrones. We don't see them because they're not doing much. They will at some point soon. I've talked about this in other live streams. Clearly, they've got plans. Clearly, they're going to start getting involved because a lot of the story's now coming down to Old Town. But thus far, they've sort of stayed out of it. Just having a quick flick through. I'm sure I've got. I hope I've not missed any. But for my people saying, I'm fully prepared to support Rhaenyra through whatever war crime she is about to commit. Hashtag Team Black. Well, yeah. So Team Black are in the right, basically, ultimately. So yes, fine. But George R. R. Martin does want this to be a very kind of grey conflict. And she is, as you say, she is going to commit, or Team Black as a whole will commit various war crimes. Question from Martin S. Is Daemon Targaryen a great fighter? Also, my previous super chat about House Hightower. Yeah, I've done the previous super chat. Is Daemon Targaryen a great fighter? Yes, he is. He absolutely is. We saw that a couple of times. We saw that in the tourney at the beginning, and then we also saw that in the Stepstones. So he is a great fighter, but then you can add on top of that the fact he's got a dragon. So he is, I mean, he's not there being like, this was the greatest fighter of the age. He's not like an Arthur Dane kind of figure, but he's definitely up there as one of the top fighters in the world at the time. Philip, what a Song of Ice and Fire related book would you want George R. R. Martin to write the most besides the main books, Dunk and Egg and Fire and Blood 2? Well, I mean, I think that's the order I want them. The main books, Dunk and Egg and Fire and Blood 2. I mean, honestly, if we get all of them, I'll be happy. That would definitely work for me. In terms of what else could be written that he could write, I think I would quite like the equivalent of Fire and Blood, but for the Starks, because there's so much history there, and he would have to skate over a lot of it. But there are big gaps. There are huge gaps in the history of House Stark that we just simply do not know about. You can go just 2-3 generations back from Ned Stark, and we just don't even know who the rulers were. So there are big gaps going on there. I'd love to know about at which point did the North remember turn into the North is clearly forgotten. What was going on with some of these fantastic characters who Brandon the Builder, the shipwright, sailing off to the west, then we're burning the all of the shipyards. What was that all about? There's a whole, how did they conquer the North? Because they didn't start being in charge of all of the North. They took over centuries. They took bit by bit by bit before they were finally in control of all of the North. So I think I would like that. That's assuming that all of the burning questions that I have about what happened in the Long Night and what happened in Summerhall and things like that, that they get answered in the main books. Carlos Ballerinas asking, is the Targaryen in the Child Fighting Pits Gaiman pale hair? Almost certainly yes. This is a character that will appear later on, and a bastard of Aegon. George R. R. Martin loves royal bastards, and he thinks they're a great plot point. And here we've just been shown one. I can completely understand why they might not have wanted to show lots of them, but just showing one, I think, works really well. And probably somewhere around season 3, 4, that will reappear. Let's go to a question from Gear saying, "Hi Robert, great channel. Loved House of the Dragon. What do you expect from season 2 of House of the Dragon? New characters? Have not read the books yet." So yeah, I talked about new characters a little bit earlier in the stream, so I'm not going to go over that. So my overall take, if you don't mind book spoilers, if you've not read the book, but we're now at war. This is the season 1 was how do we get to the point where war happens, and that last look from when Rhaenyra turns around, she's got war in her eyes. That was what Ryan Condal wrote down on his little sort of script or little acting directions there, that she turns and she has war in her eyes. So that is where we're getting up to. Maybe war could have been diverted at various points in the build-up, but it didn't happen. So war is going to happen. So season 2 is now going to be the war in full flow. And how do we get from this point where we've got the Greens in control of King's Landing with all of the instruments of power, but the Blacks there with a cunning plan of how they're going to do this economic blockade? How does this move on? How do we actually get from this to a position where, spoilers for the war itself, the balance shifts every when you're reading the book Fire and Blood, every few pages you start thinking, oh, now the Greens are now in sort of leading it. Now it's back over to the Blacks. So things happen. People change sides. The balance of power shifts. There is decisive battles that you think that wipes out one side, and it doesn't quite. So that's what we're going to have in seasons 2 and 3, is we're going to have the war. And the end point, I think, of season 2, as I say, this is from the book, is the fall of King's Landing. So that's where I think we're going to be going. Based Man, I see you've asked a few times about second season of Rings of Power. I'll try and answer that when we're talking about the Rings of Power in a moment. Dean Brown saying, thoughts about House of the Dragon overall as a visual or artistic endeavor? I thought it was so well directed, acted, and scored. Vagar silhouette wins best shot from me. Yeah, I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. There was, I can genuinely say I can't say I've got any serious concerns about any element of House of the Dragon. As a sort of an artistic venture, I thought it worked really well. I thought that they managed to make what is a very long period of time, from 101 up to 129, 28 years, not feel like 28 years by a lot of planning in the script. And this is where not just the showrunners but the writers, take my hat off to them. The turning each episode into its own thing, where they had to pull forward some events, they had to stretch some events out, but it felt natural. In terms of sort of cinematography, yeah, I thought it was beautiful. I love that, just as you say, with the sort of the Vagar shadow over Arax. I thought that was beautiful. I love from that very first moment when we had Dragon Sarax just sweeping down over King's Landing and landing outside the Dragon Pit. I thought that was wonderful. The acting has been excellent. I mean, I've given Paddy Considine a lot of credit, as everyone has, but everyone has done, all of the actors have done a fantastic job. And it's, I mean, as I say, it's hard to think of a bad thing there. The music, I thought, to start with, I hadn't really got them picked up with the music, but I think this last couple of episodes, they really started to shine and add to the scenes. there were a couple of times where this seems quite a Game of Thrones problem, where it was very dark, and so you might not be able to see exactly what was going on your TV at home. But apart from that, yeah, I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was a treat for the senses. A question from Richard Seymour. What are the chances we get to meet all of the Muppet Tullys? Yes, so for those who don't know, George R. R. Martin has got quite an impish sense of humour, it has to be said. And what he has done in a variety of different places is what he probably thought at the time were just like little jokes for him, by introducing funny names for some characters. And for House Tully during the Dance of the Dragons, then we have Grover and we have Kermit Tully. And he probably wasn't thinking when he was writing that, oh, well, they'll make a massive TV show about this. He was just thinking, hey, these are some funny names. There are also references to the Three Stooges, if you look hard enough, which is a black and white American comedy trio, and various references to American football and other things. So he loves putting things in there. Will we see them? We should see them. They did get a name check. The Tullys did get a name check in episode 10, as in fact, I think also in episode 9, it was people were starting to think about who their allies might be. The issue with the strategic issue there is that we get Grandad Tully, who's in charge, has a very different view to the next generation. The lads is what they're called. So they don't do much to start with. They just kind of sit there for a little bit, but the lads will start to come in right towards the end of it. So maybe we will just keep on hearing about them for the first couple of seasons, but it's only really in season maybe 4 that we actually get to see them. The Tullys, just to remind you that whereas when you watch Game of Thrones, you think, well, this is one of the great houses. They are one of the great houses. They're one of the Lords Paramount, but they're not one of the most powerful houses in the Riverlands. They were appointed there by Aegon the Conqueror because they were the first of the houses in the Riverlands to bend the knee, to say, well, we're on your side. And so Aegon clearly wanted somebody that he could trust, and so he put them in as being in charge. But there are plenty of other houses in the Riverlands that are older, that are stronger, that are richer, that have got more lands. And so that's what we see from most of the Dance of the Dragons, the Brackens, the Blackwoods, the Freys of obviously further north. They're hugely rich as well. How strong we know about. So there's lots of big and powerful houses there in the Riverlands. House Tully, yes, they've got a good castle, but they're not the biggest and most powerful. Martin S. Who is the better fighter, Jaime Lannister before having his hand cut off, or Barristan Selmy at Jaime's age prior to the aforementioned hand loss? I mean, my instinct is Barristan with this. So Barristan the Bold is a great character, and he has these. I mean, we only meet him in A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, when he's old. He is just he's still a formidable fighter, but he's nowhere near the person that he used to be. And when you read through book 1 and you see one of the reasons why Tywin sends Tyrion down to take control of King's Landing, to be Hand of the King in his stead, is because of this sacking of Barristan. So Barristan, he sees the significance of this, not just because he's a good fighter, but because he's a legend. He's a walking legend, that man, because of what he did in his younger days. And Tywin is so frustrated that this legend could then turn up and potentially be part of the Kingsguard of one of their rivals. So he then sends down Tyrion. There are other reasons as well, obviously what happened with Ned and a couple of other things, but this is one of the things he's most angry about. Now, just as an example of what Barristan was like as a younger man, we had the Defiance of Duskendale, which is this great story from when Aerys II, who became known as the Mad King, but before he was quite that bad, he was still king, and he got kidnapped by this the Darklings, Duskendale, and kept there in their castle for 6 months. And this was a standoff about trade tariffs, of all things. But they just got dug in, and they had the king. And Tywin, as Hand of the King at the time, he got the army. They were completely surrounding Duskendale. There was nowhere anyone could go. And the message came that the king would be killed if the army attacks Duskendale. And so Tywin was not attacking. He was holding back because he knew the moment he announced an attack, then the king would be killed, and that would be his fault. But then eventually, after 6 months, he thinks, you know what? We have to do this. And Barristan, who was member of the club, well, just give me overnight. If you go in the morning, that's fine, but I just want to see whether I can rescue the king. And he does it. A single-handed rescue mission. He sneaks into the castle, fights his way into the dungeons, rescues the king, fights his way back out again. You can just imagine this in sort of film version. He's there, king over his shoulder, fighting away, killing, bodies strewn everywhere, makes it back out, saves the day. Aerys II lives. That created this legend, and many other things that he did like that as well. He was an amazing fighter. Now, Jaime, don't get me wrong, was a very good fighter, but he recognized he wasn't top tier. He recognized that he wasn't like Arthur Dane, and I think he probably recognized that he wasn't like Barristan at his height. Reflective Rambling saying, I missed a couple of super chats. They disappeared. I only have a couple. I will try and pick them up. You bear with me. So Jamie, the guy saying, thanks. It was a huge fan. Keep up the great work. I'm curious to know whether the Dragon Dreamers could be receiving their dreams by somebody or something. Well, possibly. I mean, I think George R. R. Martin has been very clear that he wants this to be magic should be mysterious. We shouldn't understand magic. Now, could somebody have been putting these dragon dreams there? I don't think it's the Weirwood Network, because the first one came from Daenerys when they were over in Valyria, and the Weirwood Network wouldn't be able to get over that far. So I tend to the view that this is a connection to the dragons, and the dragons are magical beings. George R. R. Martin has... I mean, obviously they are, but George R. R. Martin has specifically said they are magical beings, and that because the Targaryens are part dragon, that is what is giving them the dreams. So I don't think there is specifically somebody giving them those dreams, and they all do seem to be tied in with the same kind of thing. So it's a nice idea, but I don't think so. Dean Brown pointing out Barristan's a great knight, but if he had left Aerys there, then we'd have had no book series. Yep, absolutely. So, find it hard to give him too much credit for that. Amara saying the last year has been awful for me with major surgery. Oh no, a messy breakup and depression. But your channel has been a light in my darkness. Thank you for it. Congratulations on 500k. No one more deserving. Oh, well, thank you so much. Blessings to you, and I'm really sorry to hear you've gone through a hard time, but it's the kind of thing that makes this worthwhile. I mean, it's lovely getting like milestones on how big the channel is, but to know that this has a positive impact in people's lives. Thank you for sharing that, and I hope the next year is many times better than the last year. So yeah, every blessing to you, and thank you very much. Sean Gaikas saying, if or when a Dunk and Egg show happens, how do you think the tone will be handled with a much more light main character? Yeah, this is an interesting one. So George R. Martin has said that what he wants and what he's expecting from the spin-offs is for them to be different feels, for them to have different kind of tones to them. He even went as far as saying, you know, one of them might be more comedy based, one of them might be more rom-com, one of them might be, I mean, I don't know, he didn't say like musical or anything like that, but this is the idea, is that it's not just Game of Thrones feel to them. So how will they do that? I think they will try and make it a lot more family friendly. I think they will try and make it funnier, because Dunk and Egg is quite funny. So how will they handle it? It should be, to start with, I have no idea how the ending of all this is going to be, but it should be much more family friendly. So for the first few, then maybe they'll aim not just for the 18 plus, but a lot more sort of family friendly. Nicholas Gracia saying, do you think we'll see the Mandleys or will they be cut? I mean, we might see them, but I think they will probably cut the trip to White Harbour. I mean, then they might show it briefly, but I think that they're going to broadly cut it because the focus will be on the Starks. Question from Reflective Rambling saying, giving a bonus for torturing the chat by reposting super chats below. Okay, so you're reposting super chats below. I will try and pick these ones up. Reflective Rambling, thank you very much, by the way. Cloaked One doing one for Goofy Q. I hear Ismail CC is in the UK at the moment. He has an awesome pink and white sweater. If you cross paths, could you please ask him if he'd give me the sweater? It's for a bet. Yeah, it's quite a big country. But so this is a character who plays Arondir in Rings of Power. He will be in the country because they have started filming season 2 of the Rings of Power. But yeah, he's quite a natty dresser. So if I do, you have my word. I will pass that on. Reflective Rambling saying, this is from me. I was subbed to you first. I sent them the sweater pic. It is mine. You cannot. Okay, fair enough. That's good. Who gets the sweater? I've lost track, but thank you, Cindy Larson, for your very kind words as well. Carl Carsnock saying Field of Fire, the musical. Yeah, doesn't quite work, does it? So if I've missed any more super chats, I should just say then apologies for that. What I will do is I can find them listed when I'm sort of going into my control panel here for the page. So I will answer them on my next live stream. So I'll try and answer them at the top of the next live stream. So apologies that they rattled through very quickly, and so if I've missed some, then I apologize. Voltaire saying, which dragon is your favorite in the A Song of Ice and Fire universe? And if you were to choose a noble house to be born into, which would it be? Which dragon is my favorite? That's an interesting one. I don't know. I think it's quite. I mean, I quite like Dreamfire. I do. Vermithor works well for me. I'm really pleased to see that we've got Vermithor coming in, because Vermithor, as a dragon, is always slightly under the radar because we're always talking about how amazing Balerion is or Vhagar, but Vermithor is huge and looked amazing as well. So I'm going to go with Vermithor there. And if I had to choose a noble house to be born into, which would it be? Well, one of the ones somewhere down. Maybe in the Arbor, somewhere around there. Nice climate, plenty of fresh fruit and veg, and some good wine. That would do perfectly for me. Wouldn't want to be in the Riverlands because they always get stuck in the middle of every single war. Wouldn't want to be up in the north because the winters are far too cold. So yeah, somewhere down in the southwest, I would say. Dragonwalk saying, congrats for 500k. Thank you. Do you think there is any chance that John wargs Rhaegal in the books? So I think he will ride Rhaegal, the dragon. Whether he wargs into her, I think, is different matter. Whether you can into a dragon or whether you just bond. Otto SG saying, greetings from Ukraine. Oh, well, I say every blessing to people, but my heart goes out to you. I hope that things get sorted there. It's easy platitudes, but yeah, my heart goes to you. Appreciate your videos, watching them a lot recently. Well, thank you very much for that. I do hugely appreciate that. Jewel Elson saying, all hail Sir Robert. Many congrats on 500k subs. Thank you. My question, is there even a need for Jace to travel to the Eyrie, given Rhaenyra's close ties to the Arryns through her mum? Any other Arryns central to the plot in Hot D? Well, this is one of the things where they could cut it out if they wished to, because the Arryns don't really come into this until much later. They could just sort of like show him doing like, you know, maybe like a montage. He lands at the Eyrie and then he goes to White Harbor and then he ends at Winterfell, and then they focus him on what happens at Winterfell. So do they need to with what's happening there? No, they do not. The only thing really that matters there is the fact that Team Black think to themselves, well, where are we going to send our kids for safekeeping? And the Eyrie is one of the places that they do that. So, and the Eyrie is also, or the Vale is where a dragon gets born. So it will have an important role later on, but it's a matter of whether they want that on screen. My feeling is probably they won't major on it, but they might show it a little bit. Question from Sci-Fi Dan, sorry, Sci-Man Dan saying, good evening all, congrats on the 500k. Thank you very much, I appreciate that. Drist de Erden saying, have you read the Dark Elf trilogy? The Drist books, R.A. Salvatore is awesome. I did read them a long time ago. Yes, that's Dungeons and Dragons World, Forgotten Realms, for those who do not know. David Cage saying, yo, I don't have a question. This is just my first time catching a live stream. Oh, welcome. Thank you for your content. It gets me through work. Well, I'm very pleased to hear that. Let's get to some questions from my patrons. Alejandro Martinez saying, hello Robert, in episode 10 we saw flashes of a dragon in darkness while Rhaenyra was giving birth. What do you think that was about? Well, you may have missed this because I did on my first watch through, I have to admit, because you're focusing in on Rhaenyra, is that horrific birth scene, but they do, during that they just snap out for just like a second or so to a dragon roaring. And so as I say, I missed it the first time. The second time I assumed that this was cutting back to where we last saw Daemon, which was him with Caraxes, who was basically intimidating those two Kingsguard into swearing fealty. But I think looking at it, I don't think that was Caraxes. I would have to, if anyone has done a proper check of this, I would love in the chat, just let me know. I wonder whether that was Vermithor. Now, why? I think this is an artistic thing. I think it was setting up Daemon going there later on, but I think this was an artistic thing to show the link between the Targaryens giving birth and dragons. Now, in the book, this wasn't 100% clear on the show. In the book, allegedly, that baby was born deformed, scaled, and dragonish. This is a thing which apparently happens to a lot of Targaryens. And so I think they were just trying to give a little flavor of that. They were trying to put that into our minds, that this isn't just a normal birth, this is birthing a dragon. And the Dance of the Dragons is effectively being birthed through this. So that's the kind of feel. So I think it was an artistic thing that they were doing there. but also setting up Vermithor for later. Question from Alactras saying, a question unrelated to House of the Dragon and Lord of the Rings. Do you have any opinions on Malazan, Book of the Fallen? Really enjoy your content, been inhaling everything. Well, thank you very much. No, I don't. I have to admit, I've not read that. My to-read list is very high. So I've heard good things, though. But no, I don't. I try not to talk too much about things that I don't have intelligent opinions on yet, but I have heard good things. Let's go to a question, another one from Alejandro, saying, I can accept that Helena's prophecies may have multiple meanings, but I'm not sure why some people insist that the beast beneath the boards can't be Rhaenys or Melis because the dragon pit floor was stone. Dreams and prophecies aren't always literal in book canon. Helena's don't seem to be literal in show canon. Aegon didn't close an eye, he lost one. Otto isn't at a loom. Boards don't have to be wooden. My season 2 tinfoil is that Blood and Cheese aren't the names of two individuals, but part of Helena's prophecy. If she tries to warn others about blood and cheese, not many would be able to make sense of it. Well, to pick up the first part of that, yes, absolutely. Prophecies don't have to be literal in George R. R. Martin's worlds. They are, and particularly here, they are very figurative. So my take is that, yes, this is probably talking about both things. I think that the bigger element here is that this was who she's saying beware to. Not actually her family, because it didn't actually affect her family. That when Rhaenys came up, yeah, it was annoying, it was inconvenient, but the coronation went ahead and nobody on their side actually got a scratch. Loads of small folk died. That's going to be important later. I'm absolutely convinced of it. Loads of small folk died, and so they are suddenly seeing and feeling how bad dragons are. That will come up season 3, I'm pretty sure, the people of King's Landing turning against dragons. But if she's saying beware, that seems to imply that there's a threat there, and that is why I think Blood and Cheese is slightly more likely, but it could be both, is my sort of first take on that one. But in your talking about Blood and Cheese, the idea that maybe she names them Blood and Cheese, I like that a lot, actually. I think that's really an interesting thought, because in Fire and Blood, it says they're only known to history as Blood and Cheese. Who they really were, what their names were, is lost. So that works if the reason why they are remembered is because Helena keeps on saying blood and cheese, and people just take that and say, well, that's the name that they're using. So I like that. I think that works really well. Questions from the chat. Who've we got? We had one from Lucian, actually just saying, Lucian saying it looked like Cyrax, and Bowen Stark saying Cyrax for sure. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. So this is the dragon who we saw while Rhaenyra was giving birth. This is her dragon roaring. That makes a whole load of sense, actually. So yeah, that's. I think that's now my new headcanon of what was going on there. Let's go to a question from Lady Pushkins. I thought Mysaria had a scar around her neck. Do you think it meant anything? I keep thinking about Melisandre's necklace. I mean, I haven't noticed that myself, but Melisandre's necklace, I think that the character who is probably most likely to be echoing Melisandre is Alice Rivers, that we mentioned a little bit earlier, that we'll probably see from season 2 onwards. My take is that Mysaria, although there are hints in Fire and Blood that maybe she's magical, that is just the Maesters always, any woman that they don't like, they blame, say there's black magic going on. So I think they have set on the show. They seem to have set her up as just being somebody who's at the heart of this informant network, spy network, and that's what's going on there. I mean, in terms of if there was I haven't seen this, but just making a connection here and now. One of the things which happened in episode 10, obviously, was Daemon grabbed Rhaenyra around the throat. We didn't see the end of the Daemon-Mysaria relationship. Was that the first time he ever grabbed a woman by the throat? I don't know. I mean, as I say, I haven't seen that scar. It's pure speculation, so I don't know on that one. Curse Ballerina say, does Daemon's song validate an unnatural history? Fire breather, winged leaders, fire breather being worms, winged leaders being wyverns. The price has been paid with blood magic to bind the three. Fireworms and wyverns and blood magic equals dragons. So this is interesting. I haven't got the lyrics in front of me, but I want to talk a little bit about this. I will tweet them out after this. Actually, I'll tweet them out. History of Westeros got hold of them with the translation into English, and so they were written by T. McKell, who most people won't know, and translated by David Peterson, who you may know he's the guy who came up with High Valyrian, Dothraki, the languages. Now, he's put the lyrics up. In fact, he's got a really interesting, I think it's a blog that you can go in there, and he's sort of broken down every time in the show they've been using things like High Valyrian and what it is. So if you're interested in that side of things, the linguistic stuff, have a look for David Peterson. But the fact this comes from T. McKell is interesting because she is one of the writers, certainly on season 1 of House of the Dragon, but also is a long-standing assistant to George R. R. Martin, not just a bringing him cups of tea kind of assistant, but actually there as an active supporter within his sort of creative world. She's not writing the stuff with him, but what she does do, I am given to understand this, that she increasingly is being the sort of the institutional memory. That's something Ryan Congle has said. He did an interview with History of Westeros as well. He sort of confirmed that too. So if this comes from her, this means that this is as close to authoritative as we're going to get outside of it coming from someone like George R. R. Martin. The lyrics, I have not done a full analysis of the lyrics. I might do a short video on them, but my immediate instinct is that this is what Daemon is trying to do here in the context of the show, is he is going to the dragons to warm them up to the idea that they're going to have to bond with a rider again. Now, that is quite a big thing, obviously. So that's why he sort of comes in singing this song, which is basically saying 3 heads to the dragon, but there's you, there's a rider, and the price has been paid. That's the bit I find really, the blood price, that I find absolutely fascinating. So I will do a big analysis of this at some point. Yeah, the idea of that this might validate the unnatural history, but this is worms and winged leaders, worms being and wyverns and blood magic equals dragons. It's possible. It's absolutely possible. If you will excuse me for just one moment, actually, Dan the dog is trying desperately to come in, so I'm just going to make this disappear, and if you just hold on for, I will just be 20 seconds, just let him in. Hang on. And I'm back. Apologies for that. Yeah, he was just knocking on the door in the way he does. Unfortunately, he can't. I know my moderators have asked for a cameo from Dan the dog, and we will get that as a reward for 500k, and we will get that. But unfortunately, with the green screen, it's quite hard to get him into this little corner of the room. But anyway, apologies for that. Question from Kelly Summers saying, congratulations on 500k. Question from Chris A number 9, Smaug versus Vagar. Can you compare dragons from George R. Martin and J.R.R. Tolkien's world overall, intelligence, magic, size, etc.? Yes, so there's I mean, as a comparison, the biggest dragons in Tolkien's world, massive, bigger, much bigger than the biggest dragons we hear about, like Balerion. They also have an intelligence and overt magic that the dragons in George R. Martin's world do not. So Smaug obviously talks, figures stuff out. It talks to Bilbo, and on the basis of what Bilbo says, he figures out pretty much exactly what's going on in the outside world. He is clever and also cunning. And we have, if you go back to Glaudung, who's the first big dragon we read about in Tolkien's Legendarium, he has powers of persuasion that can cast spells over people. He can make people forget stuff, things like that. So they are hugely more impressive than what we have in George R. R. Martin's world. But they do not have this kind of dragon bonding thing going on there. So that's the difference. The big difference is that we have the link with humans or Targaryens that we can have over in George R. R. Martin's world. They're very different. But if I were to put one of the biggest and most impressive dragon in Tolkien's world against the biggest and most impressive dragon in George R. R. Martin's world, then it would be Tolkien's, I think, every time. Others are saying, are you excited for the Willow TV series? I think on Paramount Plus. Yeah, I don't know where it is. I've seen this. I'm definitely going to give it a go. For those who don't know, if you remember back in, I don't know, it must have been the 80s, there was a really fun little fantasy film called Willow. And they've made a TV show from it. I've not heard anyone who's sort of seen any previews, or I've got no knowledge of it whatsoever, so I'll be going in completely fresh. And it is out at some point in November, I think. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and I will try and watch it. Eric Eastman, if you're I know you're already busy, but if you were to start covering new lore, what series would you pick? King Killer Chronicles or Elder Scrolls, perhaps? Well, this is interesting. I mean, I'd love to hear people's thoughts on this because, yeah, at the moment, I obviously cover Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, also The Witcher. We'll have 2 Witcher series coming up. Incidentally, we've got The Witcher Season 3 happening in summer next year, and also the mini-series prequel Blood Origin, which is going to be out on Netflix on Christmas Day. So I've got them. In terms of other stuff, there are some things I consider. I've thought about Dune. I've thought about Wheel of Time. King Killer Chronicles, yes, absolutely. I think the thing with Patrick Rothfuss is, I mean, he hasn't finished his trilogy. We talk about George R. Martin obviously hasn't finished his books, but there's just as long a gap there for that. And although there's been talk of making a TV show, that's not happened. So I think that the level of interest is probably not as high for them. But always happy for suggestions from people. So do drop things in the chat or down in the comments if you're watching later. Elder Scrolls, I love But we're not going to get a new game on the Elder Scrolls for years, so I don't think I will be covering that. Otto SG saying, where do you think Westeros continent ends in the north? Do you think George even knows himself? Well, I kind of imagine that, I mean, this is a planet, it's a globe. I kind of imagine it just sort of goes up and becomes more and more glacial and heads all the way up to the North Pole. That's my interpretation. Does he know himself? Yes, I think he probably does. But the fascinating thing for this is that the Winds of Winter, for all of the things we talk about with the Winds of Winter we know are happening, there was this throwaway comment that he made ages ago when he said, we're going to go even further north in the Winds of Winter. And say, through whose eyes are we going to go further north? So that's an absolutely fascinating thing. But that does mean maybe we'll start getting a few answers to those kinds of things. Nicholas Gracia saying, foreshadowing that Aemond loves MILFs. Yes, that was definitely there. Kartik Prabhu saying, Thufir asks, what is a Westerosi year based on? Can't be the seasons since they can last years. So, yeah, I mean, this is done. It's not based on the seasons, but it is sort of they have a calendar, basically. That's the way that works. And they can have a number of harvests in an autumn, a summer to autumn. So it's not that there is a natural rhythm to the world, even though the seasons are out of balance. There is a natural rhythm to what's going on there. Question. Lots of people saying we want to see Dan. As I say, apologies, you will see Dan at some point. Martin S saying, does George R. R. Martin's world have any higher powers, some equivalents of Tolkien's Valar, pantheon of demigods or archangels, or perhaps even Uru Iluvatar equivalent, an ultimate god? Is the Faith of the Seven correct? So George R. R. Martin has been very clear that we will never see the gods. We will never get knowledge of the gods in A Song of Ice and Fire. He's more interested in the human side of all of that. So if there is a god, we're not ever going to see it. And that goes equally for the Faith of the Seven as it does for R'hllor. So we're not going to see a god in action. Is the Faith of the Seven correct? I mean, you'd have to say of all of the gods and faiths that we've seen, it's the one that seems to have the least magical basis for it or evidence to back it up. Let's go to, I'm sure I did have another couple of questions. Yeah, here we go. AK Channel TV, hi there, great to see you. Saying, hello, Robert and Dan. It's been a while as I've been busy with college. I wanted to say hi to the great mods in the chat. It seems like yesterday you were at 150k subs. Here's to all the rest of it. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, it's certainly zoomed by. So it's been quite a while, and yeah, I can remember when I first set the channel up. I'll get all emotional and reminiscing here, but I remember when I set it up and I put out my first video and I told no one, and I woke up the next morning and it had been watched 3 times and one person has subscribed. I wish I'd remembered who that one person was so that I could thank them. Yeah, it was all onwards and upwards from there. So yeah, it seems like a long time ago to me. Kelly Summers saying, are dragons Maiar? So this is our Lord of the Rings question. I think you poo-pooed this a while back, but what else could they be? Did I poo-poo it? I don't know. Dragons, what you'll find with a lot of the kind of the baddie things in Tolkien's world is that they are corrupted versions or mockeries of what the good things are. So, for example, you get trolls are mockery of Ents. orcs are a mockery of elves, and the thinking generally is that dragons are a mockery of the great eagles. So that's where they are. They're not a Maya level. They are a created being, which is in some way twisted and perverted and corrupted away from the natural way of things. Sam, welcome to the Members Club here. Question from the Juggernaut saying, Team Black appreciates everything you do, Robert. Congratulations on 500k. Thank you very much. And thank you, Team Black. I think that's me now caught up in the chat. So with that, I will try and pick up a couple of questions from my patrons. The King's Road saying, G'day, Robert. G'day. In an early Tyrion chapter of A Game of Thrones, he thinks about the fact that there is a 3,000-year-old dragon skull in the Red Keep. Do you think this might have been a Valyrian Dragonlord family custom, keeping the skull of your family's first dragon? Or could it be that a dragon perished at Battle Isle and this skull was simply a kingly heirloom collected by the kings of old? Well, this is a really interesting observation, and something that I think that a lot of people kind of miss when they're reading, because it's not a thing which is given huge amounts of attention in the text. Basically, Tyrion's there and he's thinking back to when he was in the Red Keep and he went to look at the dragon skulls, and he remembers how many there were, and he remembers about a few of them, and he remembers one was 3,000 years old. Now, there could be a boring answer to this one, which is that this is a very early chapter in the Game of Thrones, and this could simply be that George R. R. Martin hadn't yet worked out all of his history. This does happen. We have to be realistic that although we love everything tying in together, sometimes some of the early chapters of Book One are there from the very first go through, before he'd expanded this whole world out, when he thought it was still going to be a trilogy and he thought it'd be done quite quickly. So that's a boring answer. An in-world answer, I think you may well be right, that if it's 3,000 years old, that certainly seems to imply maybe this was a dragon skull that they had brought with them from old Valyria. The fact that they keep dragon skulls does seem to imply this is some sort of a tradition, the Targaryens. And if they thought, well, I'm not taking all of my dragon skulls with me to Dragonstone, but I will take one, then yes, maybe this is the first dragon that the first Targaryen ever bonded with. You say, I also find it interesting that Meraxi's skull was bigger than Vhagar's. We know that Vhagar died at 178 years old, while Meraxi's plausible age at her death ranges between 58 and 124. I figure it's magic, and magic works in mysterious ways, or that Meraxi's had a strong appetite and grew up well. Yeah, so that's the one of the other things that Tyrion talks about. He says that Vhagar, you could ride a horse down Vhagar's throat gullet, but Meraxi's was even bigger. So Meraxi's was the other one of the three original Targaryen dragons that they had when they were invading, and this is the one that got shot down in Dawn over the Hellholt. Now, why would this be bigger than Vhagar's? Well, it was older, so it was bigger than Vhagar's was at the time. But so it might just be a natural answer there that yes, Meraxi's grew bigger. But it's also possible. One of the things I really like about the way they've done dragons in House of the Dragon is to show that the dragons are different. They're not just all exactly the same. They look different. So if you compare Caraxes, Daemon's dragon, it is like a worm, and it's sort of long and thin, and it's easy to maneuver, very fierce, but it's not hugely bulky. You look at Vhagar when Vhagar was lying down, or even when Vhagar was flying, huge, big, broad dragon. So it makes sense to me. Also, the heads are slightly different. They have different jaw types. So it makes absolute sense to me that maybe Meraxes just was a dragon that had a big head compared to Vhagar. Because that's all that we've got there to look at. That's all that Tyrion was looking at, is the size of the skulls. Question from Peter Roll, or actually a super sticker. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Otto SG saying, do I understand correctly that dragons died out because of degeneration due to inbreeding and a lack of genetic diversity? We're talking here in the world of Game of Thrones, then no. There's lots of theories about this, but they died out. They're here in the Dance of the Dragons, and the Dance of the Dragons will lead to lots of dragon deaths. We've already seen one dragon death, but there's going to be lots more dragon deaths. At the other end of the Dance of the Dragons, we get 3-4 live dragons left. And what happens, we don't know how they all die, but they do. And most of them are alone somewhere, so that's not an issue. Those dragons may well have just died of old age. But we also get new dragons being born from eggs. They suddenly start not being born properly. They become stunted, small, dying out. Now, I've certainly done a theory somewhere in a video, many other people share this view, is that this is probably the Maesters. The Maesters wanted to rid the world of dragons, and they finally had a chance to do so when they had absolute control of the Seven Kingdoms. There's a period of 6 to 18 months when the Maesters were in charge. It's never written like that in Fire and Blood. It's not written and then the Maesters were in charge, but it's very clear when you read between the lines. The king, Aegon III, was too young, so he wasn't ruling, and he just stayed in his chambers anyway, which meant that his regents ruled. At the end, it started out with 7, it ended up with just 1 Grand Maester. Who was the hand of the king? The same Grand Maester, Munchen. Who was on the small council? Well, there wasn't a small council. It was just the hand of the king running everything. Who was therefore in charge of all of the maesters and the communication? The Grand Maester. What about all of the other lords of the land? Well, actually, most of them were dead, and the people who were technically ruling were children, quite literally. And 4 or 5 of the houses were being run by children, or led by children at that point in time. No oversight. All of the instruments of power held in one person's hands. And in Fire and Blood, you get this sort of throwaway comment that Munchen just never wanted to say what happened during that period. It's like, okay, so how suspicious is that? So I think that that's what happened with the dragons. Kelly Summers saying, no tinfoil this time. Surely I'll revert soon. Just showing gratitude to Robert for having made so many huge streams for charity, and love to the mods. Well, thank you to anyone who has donated. You can still donate, incidentally. If you go to one of those other live streams that I've been doing, the donate button is still active there. When I last checked, then we were on 6,800-ish. So I'm going to do one more live stream, charity live stream on Sunday, just to round off my House of the Dragon coverage. And I would love that to get above 7,000. That would be really good. Whitney. Hi, Robert. Thanks for the amazing content. You're very welcome. I have so many thoughts. Concerning House of the Dragon, what was the season high for you? Also, I don't see too many people mentioning if the baby Rhaenyra birth was monstrous or not. I'm a little disappointed we didn't see wings, but I could have sworn I saw scales. The midwives looked shocked at what the baby looked like. What is your take on it? All in all, a very difficult scene to watch. Well, I would absolutely agree with that. It was a very difficult scene to watch. My highlight from the season probably was episode 8, Viserys. I thought that was just so moving. In terms of the baby, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but the midwives looking shocked, yes, I think that was definitely a hint. They wanted to leave it a bit mysterious. I mean, this is something they've done a couple of times on the show, which I really quite like. I think the best example was when they had the Air for the Day comment from Daemon. We never actually hear him say it. And so we do not know how he said it, whether he said it in a mocking way or whether he said it in a respectful way. So that was left to us, and I think this was also left to us. It didn't look like it was it clearly wasn't a happy birth, but was it dragonish? Couldn't quite see. So that's my take, is I think they left it deliberately ambiguous. I do wonder, although this did just make me think, just as another connection across the season, if you think back to what Daemon said when back in episode 1, and it was the Air for a Day comment, and then Viserys accuses him of this, and he says we all have to grieve in our own way, which I find fascinating, because if you go all the way to episode 10, and then we get the grieving process, not just for Viserys but also for his baby child, we do actually see a little bit of him grieving in his own way. He goes out on his own. He's a loner. He sort of cries into the sand and into the sea, and then he has to try and do things. He is not there going to Rhaenyra and actually being by her side when she's birthing their child. He is grieving in his own way, and I think that was a really interesting little bit of foreshadowing of how he would react to another death. Martin S saying, is Tulkas physically strong enough to neck snap Smaug? What about Ancalagon the Black? So these are Lord of the Rings questions. So I'll talk more about Lord of the Rings stuff when we get there. But Tulkas, yes, Tulkas is one of the Valar and is definitely powerful enough to deal with any kind of mortal. Where was I at? So Whitney saying, I was particularly horrified at Luke and Anax's deaths. I really loved that the writing showcased how the dragons cannot be controlled past a certain threshold, and I'm looking forward to how that plays out during the dance. Yeah, so I've talked about this a little bit already with relation to Viserys, but going forward, this is also a really interesting point, because of all of the battles between dragons we've got, how many of them are actually going to be, and there are lots in the Dance of the Dragons, how many of them and how many of these times are we going to actually be seeing dragons out of control? Probably a lot more than we think, because we've got a lot of new and young dragon riders. We've already seen that Aemond can't always control Vhagar. What about Jacaerys? Yes, he's a little bit older than his brother, but is he going to be able to control his dragon all the time? Who knows? And then we also get a lot of the... if we get Aemond can't control his dragon, what about Aegon? Is he going to be able to control his dragon? What about Helena? We don't really see her in fighting mode, but she has a dragon, Dreamfire. Are we going to see her in control or not in control of a dragon? A lot of these things, the way we look at some of those battles might change completely if it's not a rider deliberately doing things, but a dragon going out of control. And also, actually, one other thing, I think I retweeted this on a while ago, a few days ago. This also, and I've no idea whether this is where the showrunners are going with this, but in George R. R. Martin's mind, we've got two canons now. We've got the book canon and we've got show canon. So, and he wants all of the TV shows to be in the same canon. So this is existing in the same world as Game of Thrones, the TV show. So if we take in mind this idea of dragons cannot always be controlled, and we take that forward to Daenerys, does that make us actually see what happened with Daenerys and King's Landing at the end in a slightly different way? We didn't, I'm not going to unpack all of season 8 here, but it was very noticeable at the time that we didn't see Dany in that episode when she burned King's Landing, after that moment when she's there and she hears the bells. After that, we only ever saw from the ground up. We saw the dragon flying overhead. And that, I think, was deliberate from the showrunner's point at the time, because they wanted to show Dany and the dragon being sort of as one. But if we're taking what Ryan Congle has done here, this idea that dragons can perhaps take the feel of what the rider is feeling and then go out of control. So even if the rider's angry but doesn't want the dragon to be doing something, the dragon might do stuff anyway. Might they retcon what happened there by saying that actually that was Drogon going out of control? I don't know. It's just a different way of looking at what happened there at the end. Mara Lee saying, hi there, Mara, by the way. King Viserys had the Valyrian steel dagger that had the prophecy engraved on it. Do you think there is something similar engraved on the Stark sword Ice? That would be cool if it were true, at least in the show. Lord Cregan Stark could mention this to Jace when he visits Winterfell. Yes, so I don't think so. The sword Ice has been in the Stark family for 300-400 years, so it won't be. It's not like an ancient thing that has been passed down from the start of House Stark. So my take is probably not. The sword, which came from Valyria, was just brought to order. I don't think it's got a prophecy written down it. But the Starks are holding on to something, and it will be fascinating when we do get Jacaerys going up there. He seemed not to have been told about the prophecy before he headed up north. I was wondering whether Rhaenyra might tell him about the prophecy and then send him up, as he is the heir now, in her mind at least. But he seems not to know about it. But perhaps he will go up there and he will have conversations with the Starks about the North and the threat from the North and why it's important that the Starks are there, why there must always be a Stark in Winterfell, those kind of issues. But my take is that if there is some sort of Stark half to this prophecy, I would like it to be all the way from the very beginning, when the big beats of the Stark story are there: the foundation of Winterfell, the crypts of Winterfell, the tree there, the weirwoods tree in Winterfell, the wall, things like that. Catherine Furseth saying, hi Robert, I wonder what you thought about the strategic planning and decision making on the green team versus the black. To some extent, both seem to be lacking. Also, Daemon seems to go directly into war mode, while Rhaenyra seems to adopt a restraint, feeling the responsibility. Yeah, I sort of covered that a little bit when I was talking about the grieving in his own way. But I think that he did have some restraint. Yes, he went into war mode, but when he was told don't do anything, then he didn't do things. What he did do was some very practical things, like going to the two Kingsguard and getting them to swear fealty, things like that. But let's start with Team Green. and their strategic planning. The plan that Otto seemed to have seemed ruthless, but reasonable. They were going to split the treasury. This was a hugely important thing that will be hugely important later on. Split the treasury into different places to try and make sure that the blacks can't get hold of it. They were then going to send out for allies elsewhere, but also try to assassinate Rhaenyra and Daemon and the others straight away to get rid of the threats. Now, the way they seem to want to do that was to send the Kingsguard there. I think it would have been a lot more efficient if they tried to hire faceless men or something like that. But as a starting point, their big threat was the others, the rest of the family, and so they had to try and eliminate them quickly. Now, this then got muddled by Alicent coming in and getting hold of Aegon and saying, we're not going down that route. We're not going to send people over to try and kill Rhaenyra. We're going to get Aegon crowned straight away. So the plan got muddled. We didn't actually get to see all of Otto's plan play out. We didn't get to probably hear all of Otto's plan. So what you're left with the Greens is half of a plan for ruthlessly taking control and half of a plan for let's try and avert some kind of war, which is what Alicent was injecting in, which was where the peace offer came, and all of that stuff. So was there a decent strategic planning? Ultimately, no, but the mitigating circumstances were that they couldn't agree amongst themselves what they were doing. Moving over to Team Black, they were obviously reacting initially. Daemon seems to have understood very quickly the strategic situation and done some quite sensible things. As I say, securing the Kingsguard who are there, also trying to make sure that they're keeping an eye out. He kept an eye out for assassins, which is already in Otto's mind. He knew this would be what Otto would be thinking. Setting up a watch around Dragonstone, him going to try to get Vermithor ready for having a new rider. He was doing a lot of the right things, but the big kind of strategic plan obviously happens when the Velaryons come in and they decide they're not going to attack. They're going to do what is effectively an economic blockade. He's secured, he says, the stepstones. The narrow sea is therefore theirs. They can put a block in the gullet. Rhaenys can be patrolling that area there, and then they can go and try and get allies on the mainland, and if Daemon heads over and tries to get a toehold on the mainland. That actually is sensible, given the fact that they desperately needed allies because they didn't have them. They had a longer term advantage with the dragons, but they didn't have the dragon riders. That makes sensible to try and use them. But yeah, it's neither side comes out hugely as being strategic geniuses, but both of them seem to have had a solid plan that then came in up against mitigating circumstances. That's my take on what was going on there with them anyway. Steve Owen saying, might Larys be a minion of the Night King? Yes, so this is in show canon, so the Night King will exist here. Is he a minion? I mean, I can't see that. The only thing is he sort of prompting war? Possibly. My take at the moment is that I think he could be on the Weirwood Network side. Again, Joe Magician's got the theories on that. But the way that the show have presented him is just being this kind of like rather seedy social climber with a thing for feet. So maybe that is all he is. Matthew Kidd why wasn't Rhaenyra betrothed to Daemon at a young age? Merging their claims would have made Viserys not having a son less precarious. So Viserys actively believed that he was going to have a son. So while Rhaenyra was at a young age, then he wouldn't betroth them. He also seemed to, and this is again one of the non-Valyrian, non-Targaryen bits of Viserys. He seemed to be sort of more of the that's a bit icky kind of line, as in he didn't want Daemon and Rhaenyra to be together. When Daemon came back and tried to manufacture that, it was Viserys was angry. He didn't want that. So why not? Because he thought he would have a son. Then Daemon came back and tried to force the issue, and made Viserys angry. And then he had a son of his own. So Viserys had a son of his own. So that wasn't ever really an issue. So it's sort of like the timing wasn't right, but Viserys didn't want it anyway. Question from Mark Berry. What do you think of the idea of Aegon's prophecy tying in with Torrhen Stark bending the knee in a future Conquest series? So yeah, this theory is that Aegon conquered the Seven Kingdoms because of his prophecy. That much we are now pretty certain of. The way that he conquered with his sister wives, it wasn't just him obviously, was that they went off and there were some people who opposed them and they just basically destroyed them. And then after that, this is where the field of fire, after that, pretty much everyone else just went, okay, we'll bend the knee. So the Starks gathered their forces from the north, headed down south. Then they heard rumors of what happened with Harrenhal, which the big mighty castle got literally melted by dragonfire. And they just thought, no, we're not doing this. And so Torrhen Stark bent the knee and was allowed to stay in power. Because the other thing that Aegon had made sure he did was that he showed that if somebody does bend the knee, then they can stay in power. So people could see that, and that the option for the Starks appeared to have been, you bend the knee and stay in power, but you can't call yourself king anymore, or you don't, and then we'll just destroy you. And so the story, the way we've had this passed down to us thus far has been very clear. There's no mystery there. Well, obviously, Torrhen Stark did the sensible thing. Now comes the possibility that Aegon, if he does think that there is a great threat from the north, he will want to be sure that the north is properly protected, because he doesn't go to the north. This is one of those things that's a little bit odd about Aegon's behavior if he was trying to fulfill this prophecy, which is that it takes him decades to get to the north. He doesn't ever, as far as we know, ever even go to the wall, which means that he must trust the Starks. So that conversation between Aegon and Torrhen perhaps involved some kind of mutual exchange of understandings about the threat from the north. Was it him telling him that we've got this prophecy and we have to be here to do that? I don't think he needed to say that, though. So it's possible, but I don't think Aegon needed to tell anyone. He certainly didn't. By the time it got down to Viserys, this was literally just telling it from one person to the next person, and that's it. Maximum 2 people knowing about this at one time. For Aegon to be telling some person he's never met before about this prophecy doesn't quite fit in with that. So it doesn't quite tally for me. I don't think it's necessary, but the show could go down that route. Martin S. Which team has the upper hand overall in terms of including total of political influence, armies, and dragons by the end of season 1, green or black? Well, it's a balance, and it's supposed to be a balance, but the Greens are in the stronger initial position, is what we're supposed to be thinking, which is that they are in King's Landing. They've got all the people have acclaimed Aegon as king, and they had a bit of a head start. They've got the money, and they've got a bit of a head start trying to get alliances with people, which is why Aemond was there beforehand. He got there before Luke got to the Baratheons. So they had the upper hand, and Otto was then writing out, trying to get support from the Triarchy. He's trying to get support from various other places, that the Greyjoys. He even writes to Dawn. But so we're supposed to see them as being slightly upper hand, but Team Black have now got a plan, because when Team Black start out, they haven't even got a toehold on the mainland. It's just their islands. It's Dragonstone. It's Driftmark. So what they are then in a position of potentially being stronger, because they've got all these extra dragons, but that's not strong enough at the moment for them to take King's Landing. So the balance is kind of close, and that's how we're supposed to see it, is that the Greens are in the ascendancy to start with. Then it will keep on doing this, but never quite enough to say, well, they're clearly going to win. I think that's me caught up in the chat. So let's go to question from Catherine Furseth saying, what did we learn about the Song of Ice and Fire prophecy this last episode? Daemon clearly had not been told and dismisses prophetic dreams as unimportant. How do you think this difference between him and Rhaenyra will play out going forward? Well, I don't think we learned anything new about the prophecy itself, but we did learn about the relationship between Viserys and Daemon, because Viserys never told Daemon this prophecy, and this was a prophecy that he was absolutely 100% believing in, and for a very long period Daemon was the heir apparent. He was never named heir, but he was the assumed heir by everybody, until Rhaenyra in episode 1 gets named heir. But he was never told this, and that seems to be, for those who missing what was going on there when Daemon grabbed Rhaenyra by the throat, the thing which seems to have angered him was this sudden realization that Viserys hadn't ever thought of him as heir. He had not told him this prophecy, and as a result, this brother that he'd loved, Daemon clearly had loved and adored Viserys, has to face up to the fact that Viserys had always had this kind of barrier. He'd never trusted him enough. Daemon was always there saying, you should make me hand of the king. You should, I am your heir. I would always have your back. And he's right. We believe him. But he has to suddenly understand that Viserys didn't reciprocate all of that, which will have hurt Daemon. So that will be interesting to see going forward how that impacts on Daemon, whether, given the fact that the show have built up so strongly this idea that Daemon, there are two people in this world that Daemon adores and loves more than anyone else, Viserys and Rhaenyra, and if he finds out that Viserys didn't care as much, and if maybe the relationship with Rhaenyra starts to break down, what impact is that going to have on him? Let's go to a question from Mara Lee saying, do you think we'll get to see Dawn involved in the Dance of the Dragons, or do you think they'll be left out? So they probably won't show Dawn much. The Otto will try and get them involved, but basically they'll say no. So we should not see Dawn much in the show at all. The Brandalorian saying, hello, Robert. I'm surprised at how liberal they've been with time jumps in House of the Dragon, and even more surprised with how easy it is to follow, despite them. I'm on a second rewatch of the first season, and I thought that having watched so much of your channel, I might have come into the series as too primed to understand. My worries were unfounded, because even my mother is having no trouble following along and pointing out noteworthy character traits and bits of foreshadowing, like, I don't trust Otto, he's up to something. And also referring to Otto, is he about to pimp his own daughter? So yeah, I think your mum is onto Otto, yeah, I think it's reassuring that people who even don't know anything about the background seemed to be able to cope with the significant time jumps. Anyway, the question pertains to the fact that there's such a large canvas and many centuries to pull from. We know about some things in development, but if money is no object, what's one piece of in-world history you'd like to see adapted to the screen? I think I'd go with Tywin's rise to power within House Lannister and the rebellion of the Rains and the Tarbecks. I mean, I think I would find that fascinating. The bits that I would love to see adapted are things like the big mysteries. I would love to see the Tourney at Harrenhal. I would love to see that potentially still is being developed into a stage play. I would love to see the Tragedy of Summerhall, which theoretically is going to be the end of the Dunk and Egg stories. I'd love to know about Old Valyria. I'd love to know about what happened in the First Long Night. But if those mysteries are catered for, I'm now in the history of the Targaryens, the thing I'd be most fascinated by is the Regency. What happens after the Dance of the Dragons? I don't think they're going to go there in this show, but there's so many fascinating characters and so much plot just packed in that I would love to see it. I don't think we will, not for a long time, but yeah, it's probably my favorite part of the whole of Fire and Blood. Let's so my next lot of questions from my patrons are to do with the Rings of Power, so I'll just quickly flick through the chat for any more questions about House of the Dragon. What have we got? Kieran Grant saying, watching Tywin own his vassals would be very cool. Yes, it absolutely would. All the artsy saying Tywin requires little budget. Give us the Conquest. Give us the Long Night. Give us Valyria. Yeah, Doom of Valyria. This is Rosula D. Doom of Valyria, like Rome, to be honest. Yeah, so I think all of those things would be fantastic. Then Blackfire Rebellion, says Dean Brown. Yes, I mean, that's another thing I would love to see, that the Great Bastards, the Bloodraven, Aegor Rivers, Shira Seastar, Daemon Blackfire, all of them, that would be absolutely fascinating. We will see some of them hopefully in Dunk and Egg, but those characters are so good that I would love to see what happens with them. Chaos Ballerina saying, this is a channel member comment, being a member for 2 months, you get free super chat comment things like this. Supposedly, there's a deleted scene of Viserys trying to see if it's safe to tell Daemon about the prophecy, but Daemon seems disinterested, so he decided not to. Yeah, so this is now one of my future obsessions, I think, of the deleted scenes from House of the Dragon Season 1. Apparently, I've heard they're not even going to be on the DVD box set. So are we going to see them? I don't know, but there are a lot of really interesting ones. This is one that I've heard, which is a scene when Viserys is talking to Daemon, and as you say, was thinking of telling him about this prophecy, but Daemon's just not interested. So I'd love to see that. I assume that they took that one out because they thought it might be taking away a little bit from the impact of what happens when he tells Rhaenyra later. There's this not wanting to take away from the impact of something happens in the future is there a few times in these apparent deleted scenes. So Lena claiming Vagar was a deleted scene. Apparently, they obviously decided not to do that because it would potentially take away from the impact of Aemond capturing Vagar a lot later. There was a scene before the wedding of Viserys and Alicent where Rhaenyra is there helping Alicent dress in a kind of an echo to where they were at the end of episode 1 when Alicent was doing it to Rhaenyra. There's a scene where Daemon hugs his children with Laena after Laena's death, which they cut for reasons I'm not 100% sure. There's lots of different deleted scenes that I would love to see, which I understand why they took out from the show, but I just think they would add so much now, looking back, just to see extra bits of those characters. Martin S. saying, how would the Witch King of Angmar fare in the George R. R. Martin world? Well, I mean, how would he fare? I mean, he'd be pretty powerful. Let's put it that way. The reflective rambling, picking up a question for Brandoni, where do you think Lord Commander Westerling has gone? I assumed to Rhaenyra, but Eric arrived first, so I'm unsure. Yeah, I'd assumed so too. That I thought what they were going to do was try and get him to defect. He certainly didn't seem to be there at the coronation. But he hasn't appeared on Dragonstone yet. He is apparently on the cast list for season 2. So what happens? I mean, I don't think he will stay with Team Green because Alicent has already replaced him. This is one of the things that she said is going to happen is Kristen Cole is going to be Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and Harold Westerling certainly wouldn't accept that. The reason why this is an issue, incidentally, is that in the books, Harold Westerling dies quite a long time before this. So they've kept him in the show and they've got a great actor playing him, and it does seem to imply they want to use him for something, but it's not quite clear what yet. I think this will be a season 2 thing. I think he will end up in Team Black, but they just haven't shown it. Nat Westwood, thank you very much for the super chat. I didn't see a question attached to that one, but thank you very much. Refractive Rambling with saying, picking up a super chat from Kelly Summers. How fast would the dance have ended, or would it have had a chance if Rhaena had claimed Vagar? So this is if we get, so instead of Aemond having it, then it ends up with one of Laena's children. Now, this is an interesting question, because if Aemond doesn't have Vagar, then the whole battle above Shipbreaker Bay doesn't happen. The fight above Shipbreaker Bay doesn't happen. And so that leaves open the possibility that war could still be averted at that point. But probably more importantly, it completely shifts the balance of power among the dragons. Because they talked about it briefly in episode 10, is that they didn't quite, Team Black didn't quite have enough overwhelming superiority of dragons to guarantee that they would be able to take King's Landing. And the main reason for that was Vagar. If Vagar was on their side, then they would have an overwhelming force of dragons. So my general feeling is that probably, would Otto have even gone for it, knowing that all those dragons were on the other side? I'm not 100% sure. It was a game changer. Vagar is a game changer, and everybody is so wary of Vagar. If Vagar had ended up on Team Black, it would have been a short war, if there was a war. Right, I think that's me. Yeah, or all the artsy saying without Vagar there is no fight. That's the only reason they stood a chance, which is a lot shorter version of what I said. Let's go to some Rings of Power questions. Mara Lee saying, in the finale to the Rings of Power, the Stranger and Nori are heading out east. We're told that it involves the stars. We know that he is an Istari, a proto-Gandalf of sorts. In looking back, what do you think will be the Stranger's role moving forward? Do you think that we will see the Mystics again in the future, or do you think the Stranger destroyed them for good? Okay, so this is the Stranger who gets revealed as a sort of an Istar. That hints are that this is Gandalf, though they haven't clarified that, is heading east now. What role? Well, it's clear that the mystics came from Rhûn in the east, so there is some sort of a cult of Morgoth there, cult of Sauron. So they're going off to disrupt what's going on there. We know that one of the, at least one of the ringwraiths, the future ringwraiths, will come from the east. Khamul the Easterling, who's like the second most powerful of them. So I suspect that we will meet Khamul out there. The role, this is one of those things where if this is Gandalf, Tolkien never wrote Gandalf being in the Second Age in Middle Earth. So this is a completely new plot line, and it's moving away geographically from the other plot lines. So there's a degree of speculation about this because they're taking us into a place that Tolkien never really wrote about, with a character that he'd not written as being there in the Second Age. So we just have to kind of guess. As for the mystics, then the Stranger sort of said, from the shadow you came, from the shadows I cast you back, and they appeared kind of wraith-like. So they seem to have gone off into the unseen world, which might mean that they come back. So that's entirely possible. Thomas White, thank you very much for the super chat. I didn't see a question attached to that, but thank you. George R. Tolkien saying, I wanted to ask about the entirety of season 1 of The Rings of Power, because I personally feel like the only relevant thing to happen was Mount Doom being created. Besides that, just character interactions. Do you feel they did enough to make up for all they spent on making this series? It was quite expensive. Well, one of the things I said I might do to celebrate 500k was to go on a sort of a mini rant. I'm not going to go off on a mini rant, but I will. I've got a lot of pent up thoughts about the Rings of Power that I thought maybe people want to hear. I thought about doing a video. I have got a very long Twitter thread that at some point I will unleash to the world, but I'll give my thoughts on the Rings of Power because people keep on asking me about the Rings of Power and what I thought about it, and I've been very open about loving the House of the Dragon, but I've been sort of hedging what I say a little bit more about Rings of Power. Overall, I enjoyed it. I really did enjoy it. I thought it was a fun show. I thought that there were lots of things in there that I genuinely loved. In terms of the visuals, this was the biggest win for me. The visual landscape, seeing Khazad-dûm at the height of its glory is the highlight for me. This is something I've been wanting to see for a huge amount of time. We've seen Moria, obviously, in the Peter Jackson films, but to see it at the height of its glory, brilliant. Seeing the two trees, for Tolkien nerds, that was such an amazing moment, seeing the two trees. There was some fantastic cinematography as well. Even some places that I hadn't realized that I wanted to know what looked like Lindon and Eregion. Loved what they looked like. I thought the music was excellent. If it were down to me, Bear McCreary would win all the awards. I think he did a fantastic job with the music. There were some elements of the characters that I'm a huge fan of Adar, the the character they introduced down in the Southlands. I thought that he was a worthy addition to the canon, as it were, the wider canon, not Tolkien's canon. I thought he was a worthy addition. I thought that the conversations he had about the nature of orcs with Galadriel were brilliant. I also loved a lot of what went on with the dwarves and Elrond in terms of the love and hope and friendship that was there between the dwarves and Elrond. That, for me, that was a beating heart of Tolkien right there, friendship. That worked really well for me. On the flip side, there were some things that I didn't like so much. The structure is probably the biggest thing. The showrunners adopted what's often called a mystery box style. This is something that J.J. Abrams loves for TV shows. This is his phrase, mystery box. The idea that you drop the viewer into the middle of a mystery and they have to try and work their way out in every dimension, not just going through the story from beginning to end, but what's going on now, what has gone on in the past, and you kind of open up new layers of the onion, give clues, give misdirects, and there are mysteries and things to be solved as you go along. That is a style which is not how Tolkien ever wrote, and he tended to write, as you know, if you read The Lord of the Rings, you read The Hobbit, he sets the stakes out early. He tells us what the issue is. Gandalf comes along and says, "Here, that ring, that's actually an evil, powerful ring. We have to take it away, destroy it, or evil will triumph. Okay, let's go. Hey, there's this dragon on this mountain and you want to go on an adventure. It's going to be dangerous. Okay, let's go." The stakes, the story is set out right at the beginning. There's no big mystery about it. We're carried along by the wonder of the world, the characters, the writing. That's the way Tolkien wrote a story, not holding information back and then revealing it at the moments that work best. That's not his style at all. And I think that has a knock-on effect to a lot of the story and how the story was told, in that the moment you decide you're going to make who is Sauron the big mystery of season 1, that immediately takes away your big antagonist, which means that you have a whole load of bits of the story where there's no actual antagonist. And in order for the story to work, you then have to create some tension, you have to create some conflict. And how are you going to do that? Some of the decisions surrounding that felt a little jarring to fans of Tolkien's work. If you have Galadriel hunting for Sauron, she's going to carry on hunting for Sauron until someone tells her to stop. Who's the only person who could really realistically say that? Gil-galad. That immediately takes him away from his role as being this great wise leader who is the first to see the rising shadow in Middle-earth. Ditto the Harfoots. You needed some kind of problem there, that you needed some sort of opposition. You create the stranger into that mix, but how do you create some sort of conflict? Well, you have to have this community potentially leaving people behind, potentially abandoning the weak and the frail, so that the stranger can then come in and help out. So some of those things felt a little bit forced for me. I'm quite relaxed about a lot of small lore changes, I have to say, in these kinds of things when they're needed for the adaptation to work. So what Peter Jackson did was huge. For those who are not Tolkien nerds, they will probably not be aware of the huge amount of changes that he made to Tolkien's world, Tolkien's story, to characters. Huge chunks of the story were left out. Some pretty important characters like Faramir were very different. Sam was made to abandon Frodo at one point, which Sam would never do. Lots of big changes. Glorfindel was left out. The Barrow Downs are left out. Lots of huge changes, but it worked because that was how they adapted it to the screen. So I'm relaxed about that kind of thing, but I think there were some changes which were not necessary in the Rings of Power. And I think the other thing that I would just highlight as a concern for me is the way that Galadriel, this story now, spoilers for those who haven't watched the Rings of Power, but the story now is actually changed going forward, because what Galadriel's character arc was for Tolkien was that she had this desire for power, and that's what brought her across to Middle-earth in the first place. She eagerly desired to rule a land of her own, and over time she slowly moved to a position where she could pass the test. When she was given this ultimate test, Frodo offers her the One Ring, the ultimate power, and she can pass the test and say no. That is flipped around now in the show world, because actually her great driver has not been about power for herself. It's been about revenge, and she has been offered power by Sauron now, all the way back there in the Second Age, and she has passed that test, and then she's very clear now this is a matter of revenge for her. So this changes the dynamic of what Galadriel is like and what her character arc was. So if we took that forward to Galadriel's moment of great temptation in The Lord of the Rings, Frodo offers her great power. It's not this great moment when she can now feel the temptation and resist it, and she has passed the test. As she says, she's already passed the test ages ago. Now this is a matter of actually what she wants is to say, no, Frodo, you go off and destroy that ring so you can kill Sauron. So that shifts a lot of things. So that's as I say, it wasn't a rant so much as just a few thoughts to get off of my chest about the Rings of Power. Overall, I will come back around to this. I enjoyed it. I actively did. It was not the Tolkien adaptation I was looking forward to, but it was enjoyable, and it has brought a lot of people into Tolkien, and I am incredibly grateful for that, because Tolkien's amazing. My wish for season 2 is that they just trust the source material a little more. There's a reason why Tolkien and Lord of the Rings is the biggest selling fiction book of all time. There's a reason why, because it's amazing, and I don't just want a fun, enjoyable TV show. I want one of the best possible. Here endeth the rant. Question from Abdullahim Esmali. I probably mispronounced that. Apologies. Are you going to do a global review for House of the Dragon season 1? I will do on Sunday. I'm going to be doing a dedicated live stream on it. I'm not sure if I'll do a dedicated video just all about season 1, but I will be doing a few House of the Dragon follow-up videos. So, for example, a few of the what to expect from season 2, and also some tinfoil theories that have been out there that I quite like. Question from Martin S. Who would win a beauty contest between Varda, aka Alboreth, and Princess Disa? Joking, obviously Varda by far. Anyway, congratulations on reading 500k subscribers, and thanks for answering my questions. You're very welcome indeed. Now, Jude the Fourth saying, to the people complaining about law changes, take it up with the Tolkien estate. Amazon bought the rights fair and square, therefore they can do and change whatever pleases them. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the other things actually about this, is that Tolkien himself sold the rights, and he did it for the best of reasons, which is that he realized as he was getting older, this was his one chance to provide for his family. After he'd gone, this was his life's work, and his one chance to make sure that he could do that. When he got offered a lot of money to sell the rights, he took it. So actually, this is Tolkien he may or may not have liked all of the details of different things, but he made the decision that he wanted to look after his family. So I've got absolutely no problem with that. Kaziglu Bay saying, don't know if this has been asked before, but are you watching Andor on Disney Plus? It's great. I am actually watching Andor. I don't think I'm quite up to date. I've watched 4 or 5 episodes. I'm not sure how many there are, but yes, it is really good. I think it's probably my favorite of the Star Wars kind of spin-off TV shows so far. Actually, it's a lot. I wouldn't say gritty. It's more grounded, I think, is the thing. It's actually showing the Empire as an administration is a different and a nascent kind of rebellion to that, without this central guiding force, pun intended, behind it, but just a few people who've got different grudges and grievances against it, and trying to come up with this. What is it we're trying to actually do? That really works for me. I think it's excellent. And Rogue One is one of my favorite Star Wars films, and this is sort of a prequel to that. Story saying the rights to make the show were not sold until 2017. What JRR sold was the movie. Yeah, he sold the movie rights, but I mean, I don't think he thought that there was TV show was a possibility. Quick flick through. Silver Scale saying Andor is good but has horrible pacing. It drags so much in places, really does the story a disservice. Yeah, I mean, it's not perfect. I would agree, but I'm enjoying it. So George, just have flicking through some questions. Mara Lee saying, on the show we only saw 3 rings for the Elven Lords made. Do you think that Halbrand and Celebrimbor made the other rings in secret, and we will see how this was done in flashback, or do you see Sauron coming back to meet with Celebrimbor in order to make them? I think the showrunners have hinted now that he's going to come back and make them. So the order of the rings being made is going to be sort of turned around. This, I mean, in order for that to work, either Galadriel is not going to admit that, hey, I accidentally became BFFs with Sauron, or she is going to say it and Celebrimbor is going to ignore it. So either way, I don't particularly like it. As I say, I prefer the way Tolkien wrote it. But yeah, I think we're not going to see. I wondered initially whether they were going to just say, "Oh, and I made these other ones beforehand," but no. I think we'll probably see him come back and make them with Celebrimbor. That certainly seems to be the way that they were hinting that it was going to go. Question from 444. Saying, hi, Robert. When I look back on fantasy or sci-fi series I liked in the last 12 months, I realized they have 2 things in common: original author involvement and world building. So author involvement, The Sandman, House of the Dragon, compared to Wheel of Time, Witcher, and the Rings of Power. Do you think that original author involvement is an important factor for fantasy adaptation? So this is a really interesting question. So is it essential for making a good adaptation to have the original author having input? No. I think Peter Jackson's films were amazing, and they obviously didn't have Tolkien to talk to. So I don't think it's essential, but it obviously helps. Having George R.R. Martin more involved in what was been going on with House of the Dragon has clearly shown. And he was more involved in the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones than he was in the last 4 seasons of Game of Thrones. He's now become very clear about that he didn't, seasons 7 and 8, no input at all. So I think, yes, it is very helpful, but it is not necessary. When you talk about the Sandman, Neil Gaiman is obviously hugely, Sandman's excellent. You should watch it, by the way, if you haven't. Neil Gaiman has been sort of writing, exec, producing, show running that basically along with others. So he's had a huge involvement. That has definitely helped. The Witcher, I find an interesting one because Andrei Sapkowski has not been involved, and that's a deliberate choice on his part. The showrunner, Lon Hizrik, tried to get him involved, said, do you want to write some episodes? Do you want to be as an exec producer? How do you want to get involved? And he said, I don't. In fact, all I want from you is before it airs, I want to be able to see it so I can answer questions about it when it happens, which is completely hands off, obviously. And pardon me, has led to a situation where in season 2 in particular, season 1 was by and large faithful to the short stories. Some differences, but by and large, season 2 did create some quite big changes to the stories. And some have said that would this have happened with Andrei Sapkowski or not? I think the big thing here is that his approach to story appears to be very different to some other writers, in as much as if you read The Witcher, it starts off as just being, well, these are some interesting stories about this guy called The Witcher. But the deeper into it you get, in particularly the novels, you see more and more that this is him thinking through and just coming up with different thoughts on the nature of story. So by the time we get towards the end, we see events happening, and we're hearing about them in tales. We're seeing first-hand accounts. We're getting somebody doing a history lesson about it. We're getting a legend about it. Obviously, Dandelion sings songs about stuff, and we're seeing events from lots of different angles. And it's almost as if we're being challenged to say, well, what's right? And does it matter which is right? What is the central thing is the story itself. So that can be used in lots of different ways. And when you get to Season of Storms, which is another novel, which novel he wrote, but much later than the rest of the stories, it's even more so the case where it's a matter of, does it actually matter whether these things happened, whether these things happen in the way that they did? What matters is that the story and the characters stay in our hearts. And that seems to be his approach to this adaptation of his work, is that I think he genuinely doesn't care if people take his story and take his characters and go off in different angles with them. So I think that is an active choice on his part. Whether you think that the showrunners and the writers there have taken them off in a good direction or not is a completely different matter. But I think that he himself does not care whether this is an accurate adaptation of his work. The second thing you talked about is world building. Attention to details is strong in House of the Dragon, Sandman, Expanse, also things like Arcane, which is excellent, by the way, Legend of Vox Machina, which I also really enjoyed. What do you think is the difference with how fantasy or sci-fi shows build their fictional worlds? So, yeah, this is another thing that I find really important. Attention to, you talk about world building. I think world building, yes, but you also talk about attention to detail. And this is one of the things which, sort of as an addendum on the Rings of Power, that I would say is it's really important, more important, I think, for fantasy, speculative fiction on screen to have attention to detail and internal coherence to what's going on, because we have to suspend our disbelief in these kinds of shows. We have to suspend our disbelief that there are elves and dragons and whatever else going on out there. But we can do that because we believe that the laws of that world are clear. It's not just anything can go in this world. The laws that world are clear and understandable. The moment that starts to break down, it starts to feel a bit more as if this isn't a world that I can believe in. Now, I could, for those who remember all the way back to, I don't know, was it Game of Thrones season 6, maybe, or 7, with the Beyond the Wall episode. You will remember it well, I'm sure. Our valiant heroes head north of the wall. They get trapped by the army of the dead. Gendry goes running off to go and get help. He gets to the wall, and then they send a raven off, and that goes to Dragonstone, and then Dany gets on her dragon and then flies up and rescues them. I can remember at that time getting involved with some really kind of nerdy details about airspeed of ravens and how fast can dragons fly, because it just didn't add up. It just simply did not work in that world for her to arrive when she did. And that was the point at which, and that incidentally, that was entirely showrunner, that episode, that wasn't from George R. R. Martin. And that's, for me, that was the point where I started to lose my suspension of disbelief in Game of Thrones, which had been really strong early on. Now, Rings of Power occasionally has had a few of those issues. Some of the linguistic stuff, I'm not going to go off into that this time, but some of the linguistic stuff, the language usage, felt quite anachronistic. But there are also things like characters getting apparently near mortally wounded, and then a couple of scenes later, and apparently just a couple of hours later, just happily wandering around with just a bandage on and absolutely no problems whatsoever. Or with Hellbrand, they didn't dare move him out of his bed because his wounds were so terrible. However, Galadriel put him on a horse for a 500-mile gallop, and he was absolutely fine. That kind of thing doesn't quite work. So the attention to detail, I think, is absolutely important. Otherwise, we lose that kind of immersion. That was my last question from my patrons, incidentally. So I will now try and pick up some questions from my from the chat. Gar saying it's easy to make a series about Middle-earth enjoyable, but Rings of Power is underwhelming. I tried to like it, but it just lacks emotional impact. Yeah, I mean, my take, one of the good things about doing this is that I'm sort of in the I see a lot of people's comments, and I see a lot of people's thoughts, and I can get a feel for how things come across. I kind of get a feel that yes, there were some people who didn't like it, but a huge amount of people did actually really enjoy Rings of Power. So I choose to honor that, and I choose to respect that. I enjoyed it myself, so I try not to be snarky about it. I will not turn a blind eye to some of the issues, but at the same time, yeah, I've really enjoyed it, and lots of other people have. Alexandra Vladimir saying, I liked The Wheel of Time. It worked well for those who had read and not read the books. I only read one. It's my go-to autumn book. So The Wheel of Time, I did enjoy. I think I probably said it at the time. Actually, bizarrely, I enjoyed the bits which weren't close to the books. I think that they created some extra, elements to it, to the show, to the world, that worked really well. There was one sort of big fight scene which worked really well. They had a whole load of extra background to the false dragon, which worked really well for me. There was some kind of great, if you remember that scene where they're all mourning and they're beating their chests, that was not in the books. Those kinds of things I think worked really well. Mitch Cutting saying, to be fair, Gendry's cross-country speed is world-renowned. I'd have been upset if nobody mentioned it. Well, he's certainly an excellent rower, and he showed that his sort of cross-country running across ice was up to standard as well. Kelly Summers asking if there's any hope that the stranger is Alatar Palando, the Blue Wizards. Until the show makes me sad, my headcanon is that Alorin was anxious on the boat ride and asked them for tips. So is there a chance that this is one of the Blue Wizards? I think there's a chance, but it should if it is, because the Blue Wizards were there in the Second Age, and they were off to the east. But the hints were it was Gandalf. So this might be just false hints that they're just trying to mislead us in some way, but they were heavily hinting that that was Gandalf. Mighty Mulatto saying, does Helbrand kill Adar, make him a martyr for the orcs, and blame Isildur? I think that's a good idea. Isildur is definitely there, but he has to do something to take control and make the orcs will fear him. He's not going to make the orcs love him. The orcs will fear Sauron. So whatever he does, it will make them fear him. Okay, let's. Kieran Grant saying, where did Galadriel hide that knife while she was swimming? I think she seemed to have it in her hand, didn't she? Andrew Kay saying, speaking of showing the size of the universe, the Rings of Power choices made the world feel small, in my opinion, covering distances so quickly and abrupt location shifts opposite of Peter Jackson films. Yeah, so this is actually another thing which I find fascinating, which with Game of Thrones, they started out, half of Game of Thrones was on the road going somewhere, and the enjoyment was the travel, the movement from one place to another. You feel the different distance from Winterfell down to King's Landing because it took them several episodes to get there. And that worked, I think, really well. By the time you got to season 8, then they were just jump cutting from one place to another. And that, yes, it made the world feel smaller, and it also kind of got rid of a lot of the rhythm of what was going on. Peter Jackson's films have a lot of, they had the New Zealand scenery, which was, effectively another actor in the show anyway, and just tromping across the scenery, which is very Tolkien. There's a lot of travel obviously in both The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. They're travel stories for the most part. So has the Rings of Power done that? Well, sometimes a bit of it, but there's not been huge amount. Some of the random scenes that I loved the most were like when the Harfoots were doing their journey, and we just sort of saw bits of them sort of pushing their caravans across different parts of countryside. I thought that worked really well. But no, Elrond seemed to sort of zip across between Lindon and Khazad-dûm and Eregion without any kind of travel in between. So yeah, I think they could definitely do a bit more of that, and that would, I think, probably help with the pacing issue, because that would make it feel like this is an experience. This is an adventure. It's not just a series of encounters. For my people saying, have you seen Arcane on Netflix yet? And if so, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Yeah, I've seen the first 4 episodes, which I was told that they released them in that was sort of a series. I thought Arcane was excellent. I don't know much at all about the background to the game or anything like that, so I've come completely fresh to it. But it works. I thought it was a really, really good. It's kind of a sort of a steampunky feel, but in a magical setting. It worked well. It worked well. So I'm looking forward to watching those. This is one of the downsides for me of having covering 2 shows at the same time, is I've had no time to watch other things that I want to watch. I've just been spending my time doing all of this. So I'm hoping over the course of the next couple of months I might actually get back to finishing off Arcane. I also didn't manage to finish off Sandman, which I was loving. So yeah, I would recommend Arcane, but I've not finished watching it yet. Jude the Fourth saying, the Rings of Power season 2 will have a 2-episode battle. What battle do you think it will be? And do you think it can be on a par with Helm's Deep due to scale and time? I mean, I don't think it'll be on a par with Helm's Deep. Because I think Helm's Deep is amazing. In terms of the battle, what might the battle be? They're shifting things around a lot, so it's hard to be sure. But there is the War of the Elves and Sauron, basically after the creation of the rings in the books. After the creation of the rings, and Sauron's made the one ring, and he goes, ha ha ha, now you're all under my control, and the elves just take their rings off, and it's like, Sauron, that plan didn't quite work. And he goes, right, I'm going to go and gather all those rings. They're all up there in Eregion. I'll go and get them. And he just gets his army and charges across Middle Earth and invades Eregion. And we get several really cool battle scenes there. We get Celeborn comes in and leads a charge against the Vanguard, Sauron's Vanguard. Celeborn obviously has to appear in the show first before that can happen. Elrond also comes. He arrives a little bit late and then fights this kind of rearguard action, getting a whole load of sort of survivors from Eregion, and he finds this great hidden valley and he holds himself up there, and then there's this it's basically besieged for a long time by Sauron's forces before Gil-galad and the Númenóreans come and rescue them. And that place that Elrond holds up in with all of these survivors is Imladris, which becomes Rivendell. So I have a feeling that may well be it. If that's the first or next big battle that we've got, they'd have to get through a reasonable amount of plot before they get there, to be honest. But who knows? Who knows? They appear willing to sacrifice fidelity to Tolkien's work in aid of what looks good. So I think that would be my best guess. And that would work as a 2-episode battle as well, when you have the first attack on Eregion and you have the second being the Elrond effectively founding Rivendell and being besieged there. Razula D saying even a big part of the Silmarillion is about travelling. Just ask Turin. Yeah, there was a lot of travelling going on in there. All the artsy saying, do you think House of the Dragon will go to the Regency? If so, where would the end of the season series be? Now, I don't think they're going to cover the Regency. I think they will end it with the Hour of the Wolf. That's my best guess. They're only doing 4 seasons. I don't think they can do the Regency. It's a shame because I would love them to. The Gaia saying, what do you think will happen to Adar in season 2? I quite liked... I've forgotten already who said it. One of the super chats earlier saying maybe Sauron will kill Adar and frame Isildur. I think that's possible. In any event, he's either killed or subjugated by Sauron, and I think that it's not going to be. I think he wouldn't. Given his history, I think he wouldn't allow himself to become Sauron's lieutenant. So, yeah, I think he will get killed, which is a shame because I think he's a great character. Simon Schaffner saying, costume and set design-wise, which show did you prefer? Did you think Harfoot costumes and sets were just a little heavy-handed? Favorite art choices across both? Costume and set design, I mean... The visual landscape, I go with Rings of Power. As I said, there were some things there. I thought that the Casa Doom was amazing. There was lots to absolutely love there. In terms of the set design itself, I think I would go with House of the Dragon. There are some really nice. I mean, I love the new Iron Throne. I love the painted table with the lights underneath it that they had in Dragonstone in that last episode. So I think that's where I'd go. In costume wise, I mean, I struggle to think of. Probably House of the Dragon would be my take on that one. When you say Harfoot costumes are just a little heavy-handed, I'm sure I thought they were okay. I quite enjoyed that. Yeah, I think that one, for my money, that was quite close between the two. I think that the difference between the two is the quality of the plot and writing and the structure of the stories. I think that's where I see the biggest difference between them. Reflective Ramblings saying someone theorized Adar would make it to the final battle, bringing orcs to rep some of all of the peoples participating on both sides. Oh, that's quite interesting. Yeah, so this is a random thing that Tolkien said, was that in the last alliance then of elves and men, it included all races of Middle Earth on both sides, which was like so hang on a moment, that means there were some evil elves and some good orcs, does it? Tolkien doesn't go into details, but it would make sense maybe if Adar does hang around and do that. I'd quite like that a lot. Vertically Random also pointing out Costume CO's channel. Highly recommend that. Okay, I think with that, I'm caught up with the chat. So I will be back on Sunday with a wrap up of House of the Dragon as a whole. I'll look at the season as a whole, so I'll take any more questions on that. And then I'm just going to get back into my usual rhythm of just Thursdays. But the Sunday one will be my last one of this charity drive, which has been in aid of Alzheimer's care and research. So if you haven't yet donated for that, I've been collecting all the way through both of these seasons, then I would love you to, if you can afford it, donate in that stream. But the videos will keep coming. I know both shows have now ended. The videos will keep coming. I've got a Helena one coming out probably tomorrow. I've got one about what actually is Mithril coming out some point in the next week or so. So the videos will be slightly less frequent than they were during the show, frankly, because I need a little bit of sleep now to recover from it all. But they will keep coming. So if you're watching this back a little bit later, then appearing somewhere around here is going to be a link to other live streams that I've done. Appearing here is a link to my Patreon page. Patreon is the best way. If you wish to support this channel, that's the best way to do it. That's all for this time. Take care, everyone, and I will see you again soon.